You step into the early morning stillness of the American frontier, the air carrying that cool, earthy smell that settles over untouched land right before the sun decides to show off. The light is soft enough to make everything look kinder than it really is. Trees blur at the edges, shadows feel polite, and even the insects seem to agree to keep their opinions to themselves for a moment. You feel the rough wooden boards of the cabin porch under your feet, the kind that still creak like they're complaining about being woken up this early. A thin ribbon of smoke drifts from the stone chimney beside you, and you catch that unmistakable scent of burning pine. A scent that says, "Good morning, good luck, and I hope you survive this," all at the same time. It's comforting, in an "I'm totally not freezing or starving yet" kind of way. Somewhere far out in the trees, a lonely bird calls out, and you tell yourself it sounds friendly. It doesn't, but that's fine. You're here now, at the edge of the known world, and you probably won't make it through this day. Before we wander too far into the wilderness, take a soft breath. And if you're awake enough, gently tap the like button. It helps more sleepy wanderers find their way here. If you feel cozy already, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where our little midnight caravan is tuning in from. Now then, let's ease into tonight's journey. You shoulder a rough wool coat, one made from a sheep that probably wasn't too thrilled about becoming outerwear. The fibers itch slightly against your wrists, and you can see why frontier folks kept moving. Pausing too long means admitting discomfort. You step off the porch, and the frozen ground crunches under your boots. Boots that are, frankly, more decorative than warm. Early settlers used everything they had, and everything, sometimes included shoes that leaked so reliably they may as well have come with soggy disclaimers. You walk toward the small clearing behind your cabin, where frost glitters across the tall grass like someone sprinkled crushed glass everywhere and called it nature's sparkle. The frontier sunrise creeps up slowly, like even the sun isn't fully committed to the idea of doing work today. A thin fog curls around your ankles, the kind that makes you instinctively double-check whether you remembered to close the cabin door because fog likes slipping into places where it doesn't belong, much like your nosy neighbor back home. In the distance, the woods loom. Towering pines stand in perfectly still formation, almost like soldiers waiting for orders or waiting for you to mess up. You know you'll have to gather water from the creek this morning, and if you're lucky, the ice won't be thick enough to require violence. Early settlers had a trick for this. They'd heat a small iron rod by the fire, then carry it down to melt a neat little hole straight through the surface. It was practical, fast, and only mildly dangerous if you, say, tripped and dropped the red-hot metal on your lap. Frontier efficiency at its finest. As you approach the path leading to the creek, you catch a glimpse of something familiar woven into one of the low branches overhead. A small bundle of dried herbs tied with coarse twine. You almost brush past it before realizing what it is, a settler's superstition. Frontier families often hung wind bundles, made of sage, lavender, or whatever strong-scented plants they could find, believing the smell would ward off wandering spirits or bad luck. Scholars still debate whether this was more spiritual protection or simply an early attempt at air freshener. Either way, it's charming and slightly spooky when you walk under it before sunrise. Your breath makes little clouds in the cold air as you step deeper into the tree line. The creek isn't far, but everything on the frontier feels like it's keeping secrets from you. Even the silence has texture here. It presses in softly but firmly, like an old quilt warm at first, until you realize you're probably wrapped in it because someone forgot to finish insulating the cabin. The twigs under your boots snap one by one, each sound ringing out far louder than it should. When you reach the creek, you kneel beside the thin sheet of ice glazing the surface. You touch it lightly, feeling how delicate it is early winter, not deep winter. You breathe out again, watching the vapor spill across the glassy surface. The water beneath moves slowly, patient as a long story. You pull out the little iron rod you heated earlier and press it gently against the frozen surface. It hisses faintly, steam swirling up like smoke from a miniature dragon. The ice melts into a perfect circle, revealing the dark water below. You dip the wooden bucket in carefully, not wanting to lose your grip. Frontier families did not, under any circumstances, let go of buckets. Buckets were basically gold with handles. As you lift the bucket, water dripping steadily, you pause to listen. The wind stirs the tops of the pines, creating a low, soothing hum, almost like a distant hymn. For a moment, you imagine what it must have been like for the first settlers crossing into land that stretched, quite literally, farther than they could imagine. They didn't have maps for half of what you see. They relied on instincts, intuition, and occasionally, the questionable advice of a neighbor who knew a guy who once walked north and ended up south. You stand, adjusting your grip, and start the slow walk back toward the cabin. The frost-covered grass bends beneath your boots once more. The sunlight finally reaches over the treetops, casting long, gentle beams across the clearing, warming the wood of the cabin and turning the rising smoke into a soft golden column. Inside, a small fire waits patiently for fresh water to boil. You step through the door, feeling a familiar comfort settle around your shoulders. The kind of comfort only early warmth can bring. The kind that says, you've made it through the first challenge of the day, even if there are many more waiting. And so begins your quiet survival on the lost frontier. You step back into the cabin, nudging the heavy wooden door closed with your shoulder. It thuds softly, the sound absorbed by the thick logs that make up the walls. The inside is dim, lit only by the embers still glowing in the stone hearth. They pulse faintly warm, sleepy, and about as motivated as you are before your first cup of anything warm. You set the bucket of creek water beside the hearth, hearing the satisfying slosh as it settles. The air carries that comforting blend of smoke, wool, and yesterday's stew, the unofficial cologne of frontier life. Somewhere under all of it, there's also a hint of damp wood, because early settlers never truly won their battle against moisture. It was less of a war and more of a very polite but persistent argument. You crouch by the hearth, feeling the slight warmth radiate toward your hands. The fire needs coaxing. Much like you, you drag a few small sticks closer, the kind you collected earlier when the sun wasn't even pretending to exist yet. The twigs crackle faintly as you lay them across the embers. You blow gently, watching the orange glow brighten first shy, then bold until a small flame awakens. It dances with the delicate enthusiasm of someone stretching before they've committed to exercise. This was one of the earliest survival tricks settlers mastered, banking the fire overnight. By carefully tucking embers under ashes before sleeping, they could keep the fire alive until morning. That way, starting it again was more of a polite nudge than a full-on wrestling match with damp firewood. It was practical, efficient, and according to some frontier wives, one of the few chores husbands couldn't escape, because the fire listens to no excuses. As the flames grow, you reach for the iron kettle hanging on a hook inside the hearth. The metal is cold, making a dull clank as you lift it from the swing arm. You fill it with the chilly creek water, and as soon as you hang it back over the fire, you hear the first faint hiss of heat meeting cold. There's something strangely soothing about it, like the kettle is sighing dramatically about the hardship of its job. You can relate. Your breath fogs a little in the cold air, even inside the cabin. Settlers had a trick for that, too, hanging thick quilts or woven rugs on the walls. Not for decoration, though you pretend they cared about interior design, but to keep the cold from seeping through the cracks. You glance at one such rug near the bed. A faded pattern that looks vaguely like a horse, or maybe a very confident potato. Hard to tell. Historians still debate whether those early homemade designs leaned more towards symbolism or I got tired halfway through and just went with it. You stand and stretch, feeling your joints awake themselves, one polite pop at a time. The fire grows brighter now, filling the cabin with a warm amber glow. Shadows retreat toward the corners, pooling in dark patches where spare tools and old crates sit. You walk to the small wooden table, a sturdy piece, built from rough planks, and the optimism of someone who hadn't yet realized how many dishes they'd need to wash by hand. On the table sits a small tin cup, dented from long use. You run your finger along its edge, noticing the tiny ridge near the rim. Settlers often used this type of cup because tin heated quickly, which meant you didn't have to wait long for your drink. It also meant you learned the frontier lesson of don't grab the cup like it owes you money. You pick it up mindfully, setting it beside the hearth so it can warm just enough without scalding your future fingertips. A soft creak sounds behind. You adjust the cabin settling. You tell yourself. The logs expand and contract with the shifting temperatures, making noises that feel suspiciously like footsteps. But you know better. Probably. Frontier nights and mornings had a reputation for making people hear things. But the only real visitor you expect is the wind, and maybe the neighbor who's always borrowing tools he mysteriously never returns. Some things never change. The kettle begins to bubble softly. You lift the lid, letting a small puff of steam escape. It curls upward and disappears into the cabin's cold air. Steam has its own personality out here. It shows up, makes a dramatic entrance, and vanishes before doing anything helpful. You pour a little of the hot water into the tin cup, watching the thin trails of steam rise like spirits stretching after sleep. To add flavor, you reach for a tiny cloth bag hanging near the hearth. Inside are dried spruce tips, yes, actual spruce tree tips. Settlers boiled them to make tea, partly for their mild citrusy taste, and partly because they were rich in vitamin C. It was one of the frontier's lesser-known survival tricks, nature's own sleepy morning beverage. You drop a few into the cup, and the aroma drifts upward, crisp and woodsy. As you sip the tea, warmth spreads through your chest, down your arms, all the way to your fingers. Your shoulders relax. The world feels less like a challenge and more like a place that might cooperate with you today, if you ask nicely. The air hums with the crackle of flames and the soft bubbling of water. You glance toward the window, a simple square covered with oiled paper instead of glass. Real glass was expensive and sometimes impossible to transport into the wilderness. Instead, settlers stretched thin sheets of animal fat-soaked paper over wooden frames. Surprisingly, it let in light while keeping out the wind, though you could not see much detail through it. Everything looked soft, blurry, and permanently stuck in a foggy dream. Kind of like how you feel after staying up too late watching history videos. Relatable. Outside, you see only vague shapes shifting with the rising sun. The world is waking, even if it's doing so reluctantly. You finish your tea and set the cup aside. The kettle continues steaming, filling the cabin with that comforting warm air smell that feels like safety, or at least like the closest thing to safety you get out here. You grab a small cloth bundle from the shelf near the fireplace. Inside are the remains of yesterday's cornbread, dry, a little crumbly, but still edible. You tear off a piece, dip it into the warm water from the kettle to soften it, and eat slowly. Settlers did this often, rehydrating stale food instead of wasting it. Waste was not a luxury they had not, when every grain, every crumb, every accidental bean counted. As you eat, the fire crackles louder, and the warmth grows deeper. You sit beside it for a moment, letting yourself lean back against a rough wooden beam. The world outside can wait a few minutes. Inside this small cabin, you take your first deep breath of the day, a breath warmed by fire, steam, and the faint citrus note of spruce, and it feels like the frontier is finally greeting you back. You rise from the warm spot near the fire, feeling the heat reluctantly release its hold on your back. Outside the cabin, the light has shifted into that gentle, washed-out morning glow. The frontier does so well, the kind that makes everything look calm, even when absolutely nothing is calm. You pull on your coat again, pat down the pockets in that old instinctive ritual of checking for tools you probably forgot anyway, and step toward the door. The wood groans softly as you push it open. Cold air rushes in like an overeager guest, brushing past your face and slipping right under your collar with the confidence of someone who pays rent. You step outside and let the door fall shut behind you. The frost still clings to the ground, but the sun has begun to soften its edges, turning ice crystals into little pinpricks of white fire. Your first chore of the day waits patiently, feeding the livestock. Livestock sounds more impressive than the reality. Out here, settlers often began with just a few animals, maybe a pair of chickens, a goat with attitude problems, and if you were very lucky or extremely stubborn, a milk cow who pretended she didn't see you calling her name. You walk toward the small pen beside the cabin. The boards are rough and mismatched because settlers built fences with whatever pieces of lumber they could salvage. Some sections look strong and sturdy, others resemble a Jenga tower that lost hope halfway through. You unlatch the gate, and as it swings open, a lone hen eyes you suspiciously. Hens always look suspicious, as if they know secrets about the universe and refuse to share them because you forgot to bring snacks. You scatter a small handful of grain onto the ground. The chickens rush toward it, with all the dignity of people sprinting for the last donut at a meeting. Their feathers shimmer faintly in the morning sun, russet, gold, dusty greys, tiny warm islands of life in a cold world. As they peck and shuffle, you notice the odd little trick settlers used when food was scarce. Mixing ground-up eggshells into the feed. It gave the chickens extra calcium, helping them lay sturdier eggs. A practical move, though the chickens probably preferred not to think too deeply about where the extra crunch came from. The goat trots over next, head held high like she owns the property. Her horns curl backward, and her breath fogs the air with little puffs. You reach into your coat pocket and pull out a handful of dried moss, not much, but enough to keep her satisfied for now. She crunches happily, then bumps your elbow with her head in a way that's either affectionate or a threat. Historians still debate goat intentions. A soft breeze sweeps across the Wa, clearing, carrying with it the faint scent of pine, cold earth, and something almost sweet, maybe sap warmed by the rising sun. You look toward the small field beyond the pen, where your tools lean against a stump. A hoe, an axe, and an old rake with a handle that's trying very hard not to snap in half. They stand there silently, judging your posture. Before grabbing anything heavy, you kneel to test the soil near the field's edge. Early settlers checked the ground often, especially during colder months. They weren't just looking for moisture, they were feeling the frost line. The deeper the frost, the harder the coming weeks would be. Today, your fingers press against the dirt, and you feel resistance just below the surface. Not terrible, not great. Roughly, the frontier version of it could be worse. You stand again and grab the hoe. The wooden handle is smooth from years of use, shaped more by human hands than by tools. As you drag it across the soil, the earth breaks, apart into small clumps that crumble between your fingers. The cold air bites at your cheeks, but your body warms from the steady rhythm. A squirrel chitters at you from a branch above, flicking its tail with dramatic flair. You pause, watching it scramble along the branch like an acrobat who didn't get enough attention growing up. Frontier squirrels were bold, they raided gardens, stole grain, and occasionally sat on fence posts judging settlers as if they'd personally invented agriculture. You continue tilling the earth, row by row. The movement is repetitive, almost meditative. It gives your mind room to wander. You think about how early settlers managed entire homesteads with so few tools. They relied on simple physics, shared knowledge, and techniques passed down by word of mouth. One of the more surprising frontier tricks involved planting beans alongside corn, so the beans could climb the stalks, no trellis needed. Nature doing the heavy lifting. It's a good reminder that cooperation isn't just a human skill. When you pause to catch your breath, you notice the faint outline of the path you walked earlier, the one leading toward the creek. Remember the fog curling around your ankles? It's gone now, replaced by long shadows stretching from the trees. The world is shifting from morning stillness to full daytime wakefulness, even if it's doing so slowly, like someone trying to get out of a warm bed. Relatable. A distant sound catches your ear, a rhythmic chopping echoing through the woods. Somewhere to the east, your neighbor is splitting firewood. The steady thud of axe on log carries through the cold air. It's a comforting sound, a reminder you're not entirely alone out here, though you're also reminded of his suspicious habit of borrowing tools and returning them months later with tales that sound more like excuses than explanations. You wipe your hands on your coat and lean on the hoe for a moment. The sun creeps higher, warming your face. The field, your little pen, the cabin behind you, they all feel temporary, fragile, like sketches drawn on frost that could vanish with a single warm breath. Yet they endure. Somehow, you take a deep breath. The air is crisp and clean, with no hint of smoke now that the wind has shifted. You turn and glance toward the cabin. The chimney still sends up a thin plume of steam from the kettle inside. The scent of spruce tea lingers faintly on your clothes, a reminder of the small comforts that keep settlers going. You tighten your grip on the hoe and consider what task comes next. There is no shortage of work on the frontier. The day stretches ahead of you like a long, uncertain road. But for now, you stand in your little patch of earth, warmed by the rising sun, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a world waking up. You rest the hoe against the stump and roll your shoulders, letting the morning chill settle into the fabric of your coat. The sun may be rising, but it still hasn't made any firm commitments about actually warming anything. Frontier mornings are a bit like co-workers who show up to the meeting but never contribute, present, technically, but not helpful. You walk back toward the cabin, brushing your glove across the tops of the frosted grasses. The tiny crystals break under your touch, scattering like crushed sugar. A light wind skims across the clearing, carrying with it the familiar sting of cold that reminds you just how thin your coat really is. Settlers didn't have access to thick winter jackets filled with sleek synthetic insulation. They had wool, leather, and the stubborn belief that layering would solve everything. Inside the cabin, the fire still hums softly. The warmth hits your face the moment you open the door, and it feels like stepping into a hug from someone who smells faintly of smoke and good intentions. You close the door behind you, trapping the heat before it slips away. Heat has a habit of escaping frontier cabins, like it's late to an appointment. You move toward the hearth and kneel beside the fire, feeling the warmth seep through your coat. This is a good moment to check the firewood supply. Settlers learned early that a well-stocked woodpile was as essential as a well-stocked pantry. You glance at the stack beside the hearth. Small logs, kindling, and a few larger pieces that still need splitting. Enough for now. But enough for now, on the frontier, was usually code for, you'll regret not doing more later. You lift one of the thicker logs and place it gently onto the flames. It crackles, sparks rising like tiny fireflies before fading into the stone. As the wood catches, you feel the deeper layer of warmth fill the room, a steady, slow-growing heat that makes your fingers relax and your shoulders drop. Fire wasn't just warmth for settlers. It was survival, comfort, protection, and occasionally, a reason to gather and tell stories until the embers dimmed. To help the cabin stay warm longer, settlers often used a trick called chinking, filling the gaps between logs with mud, clay, straw, or whatever sticky substance was available. You run your hand along the wall beside you. The chinking is solid but rough, holding strong despite the winter creeping in around it. Early cabins weren't perfect, but they were stubborn, much like their builders. You walk toward the small window and lift the cloth covering. Light filters in through the oiled paper, creating a soft golden haze in the air. The world outside looks dreamy and distant, like a painting that hasn't fully dried. You place your hand near the frame, feeling the faint leak of cold sneaking through. Settlers stuffed moss or scraps of cloth into these gaps to block drafts. You tuck a bit more into the corners, pressing it firmly until the cold stops poking its nose where it doesn't belong. From the corner of your eye, something catches your attention, a small iron pot resting near the wall. Inside, it are stones, smooth and rounded, the kind that hold heat when warmed by the fire. Another frontier trick: heat the stones in the fireplace, then wrap them in cloth and tuck them under blankets at night. Early settlers treated hot stones like prized guests, warm, quiet, and extremely supportive. You pick up one stone and test its weight in your hand. It's cool now, but you imagine the comfort it brings on frigid nights. You place it near the hearth to warm for later. The crackling fire responds with a soft hiss as the stone nears the flame, like it's greeting an old friend. You glance at the bed, a simple wooden frame covered with straw, wool, and a quilt that's been mended more times than you can count. The quilt's pattern is uneven, stitched from scraps of old clothing and leftover cloth. One piece looks suspiciously like it used to be part of a shirt, though it's hard to tell what color it originally was. Historians still debate whether frontier quilts were acts of artistic intention or sheer necessity. Probably both. You check the quilt's edge, lifting it slightly and letting it drop softly back into place. The straw mattress rustles beneath it. Settlers fluffed these mattresses regularly to keep them from settling into hard, lumpy shapes. You press your hand into the straw, it shifts quietly, accommodating your weight. Not luxury, but livable. And on the frontier, livable was a warm embrace. Outside, you hear the faint crack of a branch followed by the distant call of a crow. The birds always seem to know things before people did. You pull your coat tighter around you and step toward the woodpile beside the far wall. You grab a few pieces of kindling, tucking them under your arm. Keeping the fire steady is an all-day task, one that requires attention, patience, and the ability to resist getting distracted by thoughts like, wow, I really should have brought more wood inside yesterday. You step outside again, feeling the cold, to wrap around you like a second coat. The air is sharper now, tinged with the metallic scent of coming snow. A subtle warning the sky gives before it decides to empty itself onto the world. You look toward the forest. The trees stand still, but there's a quiet tension in the air, like they're holding their breath. You walk to the chopping stump where a few logs sit, waiting their turn. You pick up the axe, its handle smooth but familiar, its head dull with soot and use. Settlers sharpen their axes regularly, using river stones or small metal files. A sharp axe made the difference between a single clean strike and an embarrassing series of whacks that made the neighbors silently judge you. You set a log on the stump and raise the axe. The cold air bites your face, the handle solid and real in your hands. You bring the axe down. The wood splits with a deep, satisfying crack that echoes through the clearing, a sound that feels like frontier applause. You repeat the process, lift, swing, split. The rhythm warms you from the inside out. Your breath fogs the air, your boots grip the frosted ground. Each strike deepens the warmth that awaits inside the cabin. When you gather the freshly split logs and carry them back inside, the fire greets you like an old friend. You place the wood beside the hearth, wipe the frost from your sleeves, and let the warmth wash over you once more. And little by little, you understand why settlers worked so hard to stay warm. Not just to survive, but to create small pockets of comfort in a world that offered them so few. You ease the door shut once more, letting the fire's warmth settle around you like a soft woolen cloak. Your hands tingle as they thaw, little sparks of feeling returning one finger at a time, as if your body is checking in and saying, "Yes, we are still alive," surprisingly. The cabin glows in that comforting orange hue only firelight can create, the kind that makes even rough wood and uneven floors look charming. Your stomach gives a polite but insistent reminder that the frontier doesn't pause for hunger. Meals out here weren't events, they were brief negotiations with whatever ingredients you had managed not to lose, spill, or burn in the previous days. You walk to the small shelf near the hearth, where various jars, cloth bundles, and mystery containers sit in a proud but slightly chaotic arrangement. On the top shelf, you find a jar of dried beans. They rattle as you lift them, sounding like a tiny applause for making it through the morning. Beans were a frontier. Staple, long-lasting, reliable, and about as exciting as listening to someone describe the weather for 20 minutes. But they kept you alive, and that's worth celebrating. You pour a handful into the small pot already sitting near the fire. They bounce and clatter against the metal, each little sound echoing faintly in the quiet cabin. You add some water from the bucket and place the pot at the edge of the hearth, letting the heat start its slow, steady magic. Settlers often kept something simmering throughout the day: beans, stew, or thick porridge. Food cooked low and slow made the most of limited fuel, and it filled the cabin with that irresistible "something warm is coming eventually" smell. Next, you grab a small wooden crate from under the table. Inside are a few potatoes wrinkled, knobby, and bearing more personality than their grocery store descendants. You pick out the least lumpy one and brush off the dirt. Frontier potatoes were never glamorous, but they were sturdy, kind of like the settlers themselves. You cut the potato into chunks, drop them into the pot, and listen as they plunk below the water's surface. The fire crackles, releasing a tiny burst of sparks that swirl up the chimney. You sit back on your heels for a moment, breathing in the scent of warm earth and simmering broth. A faint draft brushes the back of your neck. You turn and notice the cabin door's lower hinge has loosened, leaving a thin gap. It's subtle, but out here, subtle cold becomes unsubtle very quickly. You kneel beside the door, pulling a small peg from a woven basket near the shelf. Settlers often carried little wooden pegs, nails, or wedges for quick repairs. They were the frontier version of "I'll fix it later." Except, well, you actually had to fix it now. You tap the peg into place with a short, decisive knock. The draft disappears immediately, like it knows when it's no longer welcome. You stand and stretch, your back popping gently. The simmering pot begins to release small bubbles, the kind that whisper instead of shout. The scent grows richer, comforting, and subtly smoky frontier seasonings, often consisted of whatever touched the fire recently. On the table lies a small bundle wrapped in cloth. You unroll it to find a few herbs, dried sage, a little thyme, and something that may or may not have been mint at some point in its life. Early settlers gathered herbs constantly, not just for flavor but for medicine and delightfully questionable remedies. Today, You crumble a pinch of sage into the pot. It falls like green snow into the bubbling water. As you stir the mixture with a wooden spoon, you remember one of the stranger frontier facts. Some settlers believed hanging onions in the cabin would absorb illness from the air. Scholars still debate whether this was based on observation or simply the world's first attempt at holistic interior decor. Either way, you eye the single onion hanging from a beam above your head and decide not to question it too deeply. The stew needs time, so you step over to the table and begin preparing one of the frontier's simplest midday staples, Johnny cakes. You reach for the tin of cornmeal yellow and slightly coarse and scoop some into a wooden bowl. Adding a bit of warm water from the kettle, you stir until the mixture forms a thick batter. Not pretty, not fancy, but reliable. Much like the frontier lifestyle as a whole. You pour the batter onto the hot stone near the hearth. It sizzles faintly as it spreads into a lopsided circle. The smell of toasting corn drifts up, merging with the simmering stew in a way that feels like a warm hug from someone who understands how tired you are. You wait patiently, turning the Johnny cake once, twice, until it takes on a golden brown color. When it's ready, you lift it onto a small wooden plate and tear a piece from the edge. It's warm, slightly crisp, and surprisingly comforting proof that simple food, you can still feel like a feast when the world outside is cold and unpredictable. You sit at the table, dipping the Johnny cake into the stew, now thick and fragrant. You take a slow bite. The beans are soft, the potato tender, the herbs subtle but present. It's not gourmet, it's frontier nourishment. And somehow, it tastes like contentment. As you eat, the sunlight outside softens, filtering through the oiled window. Dust motes drift lazily in the warm air, turning the cabin into a quiet, floating dream. You hear the faint groan of the wind brushing against the walls, followed by the soft rattle of something outside, maybe a loose board or a curious bird testing its reflection in the window. You savor another bite. The warmth spreads through you, calming your shoulders and settling your breath. A quiet peace settles over the cabin, the kind of peace that comes after work but before the next task arrives. You finish the last few bites of stew, letting the warmth linger in your mouth. The pot still simmers quietly on the hearth, sending soft plumes of steam into the air like the cabin itself is sighing in relief after the long morning. You wipe your hands on your coat, stand slowly, and stretch until your muscles hum gently. Outside, the light shifts again. Afternoon edges closer, bringing that particular kind of brightness that feels both hopeful and slightly suspicious. You walk to the window and lift the cloth covering. The world beyond the oiled paper is soft and hazy, blurred into shapes and colors that suggest more than they reveal. You press your hand lightly against the cold frame and feel the subtle temperature change. Settlers didn't have weather apps. Of course, they had instinct, observation, and occasional luck. Today feels like a day that will soon test all three. You unlatch the door and step outside. The air greets you with a sharper bite now, the kind that whistles politely before slapping you across the cheeks. The sky has shifted from morning blue to a duller grey, with thin streaks of cloud stretching like pulled wool across the horizon. You look northwest because frontier folk always checked the northwest first. Storms had a habit of sneaking in from that direction, like an uninvited dinner guest who still expects dessert. You take a long, slow breath. The air tastes metallic, crisp, and faintly damp, a clear sign that snow may be on its way. And not the friendly postcard variety, either. The real, heavy stuff that arrives silently, then asks if you remembered to bring in enough firewood. Early settlers relied on simple cues like this. The sudden quiet of birds, the smell of the air, the tension in the wind. Even the way the trees stood seemed to whisper warnings if you paid attention. You step off the porch and squint toward the tree line. The pines stand unusually still, their branches stiff and dark. A few birds flutter low across the clearing, unusually close to the ground. One of those subtle signs old frontier guides insisted meant weather was turning. Historians still debate whether this was genuine folk wisdom or early confirmation bias. But as you watch the birds disappear into the underbrush, you feel a prickle of instinct on the back of your neck. You decide to take a quick walk to check the traps you set earlier along the edge of the woods. You grab your scarf wool, scratchy, reliable, and wrap it twice around your neck. The fibers smell faintly of smoke and dried herbs, a comforting mix. Your boots crunch through the frost as you walk down the narrow path. The tall grass brushes against your coat, leaving tiny white flecks that cling to the fabric. As you approach the forest, the wind threads through the branches above you, creating that eerie, hollow whistle. The frontier seems to reserve for moments when you start feeling confident. The woods themselves hold their breath again. You step carefully, following the small trail of disturbed leaves that mark your earlier passage. Your first trap rests near a fallen log, half hidden under a tangle of dried vines. You crouch and check it gently. Empty. Still baited. Still set. A good sign either the animals haven't passed by yet, or they're being polite for once. Settlers often relied on small game like rabbits or ground birds to supplement meals. Traps had to be checked frequently, not only out of necessity, but to keep other creatures and curious neighbors from helping themselves first. You continue down the path. Frost crunches beneath your boots in a steady rhythm. Ahead, the forest floor dips into a small hollow where your second snare waits. But before you reach it, you notice something odd. The sudden, absolute quiet. No birds, no rustling, no distant cracking branches. Just silence, thick and expectant. You pause. This is one of the stranger frontier sensations when the world seems to stop, waiting for something you can't yet see. Settlers recognized this moment well. They wrote in journals about the hush before the sky breaks, a stillness so complete it felt like nature exhaling. You kneel and check the second trap. A small rabbit sits inside, calm but alert. You murmur quietly as you lift the snare, easing the animal out. Frontier ethics were complicated, but settlers often whispered to the creatures they caught, as if gratitude softened the harshness of survival. You secure the rabbit in a small cloth bag and tie it carefully. When you stand again, you hear it, a low, distant rumble from the west. Not thunder too heavy, too stretched out. It's the sound of wind gathering strength deep inside the forest. It moves slowly at first, then faster, like someone drawing in a long breath. The trees sway slightly, then settle again. You turn toward the clearing, deciding it's best not to linger. The path feels narrower on the way back, the frost crunching faster under your hurried steps. The sky darkens a little more, the grey deepening into a muted slate color. You see the cabin ahead, warm smoke curling from the chimney thin and wavering, as if the wind is testing its grip. When you reach the porch, you pause and look over your shoulder. The forest stands in complete stillness again, every shadow waiting, every branch poised. You've lived long enough on the frontier to understand this kind of quiet, the kind that says, prepare. Inside, the warmth envelops you instantly. You hang the rabbit near the hearth for later preparation, letting the heat thaw the cold stiffness from your fingers. You check the fire again, still burning strong, and add another log, watching the flames flare up in gratitude. You wipe your hands on a cloth and glance back at the window. The sky outside is darker now, heavier. A storm is coming. You can feel it in your bones the way settlers always claimed they could. And ready or not, the frontier expects you to meet it. You stand for a moment by the hearth, letting the warmth soak into your skin as you listen to the storm gathering its breath outside. The cabin walls creak softly, responding to the wind the way an old man might respond to stretching. A low complaint, followed by quiet resignation. You glance toward the window again. The light filtering through the oiled paper has shifted from pale grey to something darker, denser, like someone dimmed the sky with a heavy hand. You know what this means. There's work to do more than you'd like and sooner than you'd prefer. Storms don't wait for your convenience. They show up like surprise guests who expect a 5-course meal, even though you were planning to eat leftover Johnny cake for dinner. You pull on your coat, wrap the scarf tighter around your neck, and grab your gloves from the small peg near the door. The gloves are stiff with cold, but you slide your hands in anyway, flexing until the leather softens against your fingers. You take a deep breath, the kind that tries to convince your body you're ready. You're not ready, but you go anyway. The door opens with a small shudder, and the wind rushes inside like it's been waiting just for this opportunity. It wraps around you immediately, cold fingers slipping under your collar and tugging at your sleeves. You step outside and close the door firmly behind you, sealing the warmth in and the world out. Your first task, firewood. Enough to outlast a storm that might last a day, or 3. Settlers knew that storms didn't just bring snow and wind. They brought isolation, hunger, and the rude realization that you probably didn't stack enough wood when the weather was nice. You walk toward the woodpile beside the cabin, a carefully stacked pyramid of logs you split earlier, now dusted with frost. The wind whistles through the pile, making the pieces shift and whisper like gossiping neighbors. You crouch and begin lifting logs, stacking them in your arms. The rough bark scrapes your coat, leaving flecks of frozen dirt. As you gather the wood, you recall a strange little frontier habit. Settlers often sang to themselves while working in the cold. Not full songs, more like half-hummed melodies, meant to keep rhythm and chase away the lingering fear that silence always brought. You hum now, just a little, letting the sound fill the space between your heartbeat and the wind. It steadies you. You carry the first load to the cabin and push inside with your shoulder, depositing the logs beside the hearth. Back outside, the wind has grown bolder, no longer whispering, but speaking in full sentences. The sky above churns with slow-moving clouds the color of tarnished silver. The forest shifts uneasily, branches bending and releasing soft groans. You gather more wood, bigger pieces this time. Your arms ache, but you don't stop. Settlers often aimed for one more armful until they couldn't lift another. Frontier advice: stop one armful before you collapse. Reasonable. You stop only after stacking enough inside the cabin to build a small fortress. Next, water. Storms freeze everything. If your creek ices over thick, you might not be able to break through tomorrow. You grab the empty bucket, its wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. The wind fights you as you walk toward the creek, pushing against your legs like a determined toddler trying to change your plans. The ground crunches sharply beneath your boots. A thin dusting of snow begins to fall, just a few flakes at first, drifting lazily like they're exploring the idea. By the time you reach the creek, the snowflakes have grown bolder, swirling around you in patterns that look almost artistic, if they weren't also freezing your eyelashes. The creek itself looks still, a thin veil of ice forming across the top. You kneel beside it, listening. Beneath the surface, you hear water gurgling softly, unaware of the storm assembling above it. You use the heated iron rod again, this time less gently, and press it into the forming ice. It melts, quickly, creating a dark circle. You fill the bucket, the cold water biting at your fingers even through gloves. Settlers always moved fast with winter water. The cold had a way of punishing hesitation. You heft the bucket and make your way back, the weight pulling at your shoulder. The snow falls thicker now, faster, blowing sideways in little bursts. The path seems to shrink as the world blurs into white. You keep moving, boots crunching, breath steaming. When you reach the cabin, the relief is instant. You push the door open with your hip, step inside, and shut out the storm. The warmth wraps around you immediately. You set the bucket near the hearth and exhale, your breath shuddering with exhaustion and lingering adrenaline. But there's still more. There's always more. You check the latch on the window. Tighten the rope that holds the shutter in place. Push a spare quilt along the base of the door to block any creeping drafts. These weren't just chores, they were survival. Rituals, repeated often enough that settlers didn't think twice about them. Each small action was a stitch in the fragile fabric of safety. When you're finally satisfied, you sit beside the fire and remove your gloves. Your fingers tingle as they warm, little sparks of pain that promise comfort is returning. The storm rumbles outside, now louder, closer, its voice vibrating through the walls. You watch the fire for a long moment. Flames curl and sway, bright against the dim cabin. Their warmth sinks deeper, easing your breath, softening the tension in your shoulders. Outside, the storm gathers itself fully. Inside, you prepare to meet it with patience, warmth, and the quiet determination that early settlers carried like a second heartbeat. You sit still for a moment longer, letting the fire light your face while the storm tests its strength against the cabin walls. A faint vibration runs through the wooden floorboards, just enough to remind you that nature is clearing its throat outside, getting ready to speak in full volume. The kind of low rumble that makes you instinctively straighten your posture, as if good manners could somehow impress the weather into behaving. You stand slowly, stretching your legs. The warmth of the fire clings to your clothes as you walk toward the window. Outside, the world has already transformed. The oiled paper is covered with shifting white shadows, snowflakes collecting and sliding in erratic little swirls. Each gust of wind hits the cabin like a soft shoulder bump. Nothing dangerous yet, but certainly not friendly. You place your palm against the wall. The logs feel cool on the inside, which is not a great sign. A well-sealed cabin holds heat better than that. You press your ear lightly to the wood and listen. Settlers often did this. When storms arrived, they treated the cabin like a partner, listening to its warnings. Every creak, every subtle pop meant something. The wall groaned softly, expanding, contracting, holding. For now. You grab the lantern from the shelf and light it using a thin splint from the fire. The lantern flickers to life, casting a mellow amber glow across the room. You hang it on the small hook near the bed, letting its light fill the darker corners of the cabin. Storm clouds dim everything. Lanterns turn that dimness into something warmer, less threatening. You look around the cabin with a practiced eye. This space is everything now, your shelter, your storehouse, your small pocket of sanity in a wild, indifferent world. Settlers learned early that a storm made the cabin feel both tiny and enormous at the same time. Tiny because of the confinement, enormous because of the responsibility. Everything inside must work. Everything inside must hold. Your gaze lands on the woodpile you stacked earlier. Enough for tonight, probably enough for tomorrow. But storms are unpredictable, and the frontier never made promises. You kneel and sort the logs by size, small for quick ignition, medium for steady burn, large for endurance. A simple system, but an effective one. One of the quiet frontier tricks was alternating sizes in the fire. Too many big logs, suffocated flames, too many small ones burned too fast. Balance was survival. As you lay a medium log gently onto the flames, the fire responds with a soft roar. Sparks leap upward, disappearing into the dark curve of the chimney. The warmth grows thicker, filling the cabin like rising bread. You take a slow breath and enjoy it. Then comes the first real gust. It hits the cabin with a hollow thud that ripples through the walls. Not violent, just firm, like someone knocking to remind you who's really in charge. The window rattles. The roof lets out a long, low groan. Dust falls from one of the rafters and drifts lazily to the floor. You murmur softly, "Easy there." Whether you're talking to the cabin or the storm, you're not entirely sure. Frontier families often talk to their homes during storms, not out of superstition, but because storms made solitude louder. You talk to steady yourself, to feel less like a lone figure in an oversized world. You check the door next. The latch holds, but the wood around it flexes in the wind. A small draft seeps through the edges, brushing your ankles with icy fingers. You pull the spare quilt from the bed and press it tightly along the threshold. The wind pushes harder for a moment, as if annoyed you thwarted its tiny invasion, then retreats. Another gust comes, stronger. The cabin shivers again. A loose shutter outside bangs once, then twice, before settling. You mentally add "fix shutter" to tomorrow's list, though you know full well tomorrow might not offer the chance. Even with the storm gathering force, the fire keeps burning in steady, golden confidence. You warm your hands over it, fingers spread, palms tingling with relief. Your reflection flickers faintly in the metal kettle, hanging above the flames, a wavering shape, surrounded by warm light and deep shadows. You reach for the stew pot again and stir it slowly. The thick mixture bubbles with a comforting sound, like a contented sigh. A spoonful tastes rich and earthy, flavored by the herbs you added earlier. Foods like this were more than meals. They were morale. They convinced settlers that the world, harsh as it was, still offered small kindnesses. As you eat, the storm intensifies. Snow begins to hiss against the cabin walls, blown sideways by the rising wind. The sound is steady, rhythmic, almost hypnotic, like thousands of tiny fingers trying to brush their way inside. Another obscure frontier observation comes to mind. Settlers claimed they could hear snow depth by its sound against a cabin. Light snow whispered. Deep snow rattled. Right now, the sound suggests something in between. Not harmless, not disastrous. You glance toward the roof. No leaks yet. A few drops of melted snow drip down the stone chimney, sizzling softly as they hit the iron kettle. Not enough to worry about. Not yet. Historians still debate whether settlers truly relied on sound cues like this, or whether they simply convinced themselves they could. Either way, you listen. Another gust slams the cabin, this time harder than before. The lantern sways, casting wild shadows across the walls. The fire flickers. The cabin settles with a cracked wood shifting under pressure. A reminder that even strong homes feel the strain. But you sit calmly, spoon in hand, letting the warmth from the hearth push back against the cold clawing at the walls. Outside, the world churns. Inside, you create a bubble of warmth, light, and steady breath. You finish your meal, set the bowl aside, and stoke the fire gently. The flames respond, growing taller, steadier. You lean back against the wall, close your eyes for a moment, and listen. The storm rages, the cabin holds, and you quietly, deliberately choose to trust both. The storm settles into its full strength as afternoon slips quietly toward evening. You can feel the shift before you even open your eyes again. The air inside the cabin grows cooler, the fire pops louder, and somewhere in the ceiling, a beam creaks with the long, tired sigh of old wood holding its ground. When you lift your head, the lantern's glow has softened, flickering slightly as if it's starting to feel the storm's pressure too. You stand and stretch, rolling your shoulders until the stiffness eases. The light outside has dimmed into that bluish, almost metallic shade that comes right before true nightfall. A warning that whatever daylight remained has officially given up. You walk toward the window and lift the cloth covering. The oiled paper shows only white motion, snow blowing sideways, swirling like angry ghosts, attempting a group choreography routine. The wind pushes so hard that the tiny frame trembles under your hand. Night is coming fast. Too fast. Frontier. The nights in a storm weren't just dark. They were isolating, humbling, and occasionally deeply inconvenient if you forgot to bring in something essential, like the rope you meant to hang near the hearth, or the small knife you left stuck in a tree stump outside, which is now somewhere under 6 inches of snow having an existential crisis. You lower the cloth and pull your coat around you. Even inside, the temperature has dropped. The fire still burns steadily, but the storm is greedy. You step over to the hearth and add another log, a large one this time, and listen to the flames swallow it with a crackling, appreciative roar. Heat spreads slowly, pushing back against the creeping chill that is now trying to slip under the door again, testing every weak point in the cabin's defenses. You take a moment to prepare the room for night. Settlers didn't have the luxury of assuming storms would be polite or predictable. You grab the lantern and check the oil level still enough for several hours. You tighten the cap to make sure no draft will extinguish the flame. Then you hang it from a lower hook so it'll cast a gentler, wider glow. The room warms in light. Shadows soften. The rafters gleam with a faint golden sheen, and the quilt on the bed looks slightly more inviting than before, though still lumpy enough to remind you it's stuffed with straw, not feathers. You walk to the bucket of water and check how much remains. Enough to last through the night. Maybe into morning if you're careful. Frontier life was a constant exercise in enough for now. You take a small drink, feeling the cold water settle deep in your chest. Another gust slams into the cabin hard enough to rattle the pots on the shelf. You turn your head sharply, instinct peaked. The wind howls once, long and sharp, like it's dragging its voice across the spine of the forest. Snow hits the roof with a flurry of soft thumps, then heavier blows as ice mixes into the storm. You step closer to the door and check the latch again. Still firm. The quilt still blocks the draft. But there's something else, an odd, faint tapping sound near the bottom corner. You crouch and listen. It's just a loose knot in the wood, expanding in the cold. Settlers got used to every noise their cabins made, to the point where even small changes stood out like shouts. You press your palm gently to the floorboard. Still solid, still warm enough. The fire pops behind you, sending up a brief spray of sparks. You turn and smile faintly. Fire has a personality out here, moody, demanding, occasionally overly dramatic, but ultimately dependable if you treat it with respect. You return to the hearth, grab the iron poker, and stir the coals. Red embers flare brighter, glowing like hundreds of tiny eyes opening to watch the storm with you. The flames climb, turning the pot hanging over them into a dark silhouette edged with gold. Warm air rushes upward, brushing your face with comfort that feels earned, not given. The stew from earlier still sits warm in the pot. You ladle a small portion into your cut beans, potatoes, and broth rich enough to feel like a blessing. Settlers often saved warm meals for the evening, knowing that eating heat helped keep their bodies warm longer. Your first sip is slow, soothing. The warmth spreads through your belly and radiates outward, like the fire lending a little piece of itself. You carry the cup to the bed and settle onto the edge, feeling the straw mattress shift beneath you with a soft crunch. The quilt is warm where it hung near the fire earlier, and you pull part of it over your lap. The lantern flickers gently on the wall beside you, painting calm shadows across the wooden beams. Outside, the storm's voice rises and falls in long, sweeping gusts. At times it sounds like distant waves crashing against a shore. At others, like some vast creature breathing heavily as it prowls past the cabin. The snow thickens, hitting the roof, in heavy bursts that thud like fistfuls of sand. Frontier storms weren't quiet companions, they were loud, restless, insistent presences that reminded you how small you truly were. Yet in all that noise, there's a strange rhythm, a pattern, a kind of music. You lean your head back against the wall and listen to it, letting the storm's cadence settle into your bones. The wind whistles through cracks in the shutters. Snow hisses against the logs. A branch outside scrapes across the roof like a broom dragged by an impatient hand. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth and sound merge into something oddly comforting. The storm may be fierce, but the cabin is holding. Your fire is steady. You've done everything you can. And in the heart of the wilderness, that sense of readiness, fragile though it is, feels like a rare kind of peace. Another gust slams into the wall, the loudest yet, shaking the window frame. The logs creak in response, flexing but not yielding. The moment passes. Then the storm eases again, returning to its steady howl. You take another sip of warm broth and breathe deeply. Night has fully arrived, and you, for now, are safe within it. You stay seated on the edge of the bed for a long moment, listening to the storm breathe against the cabin. The night presses close, thick and heavy. You can feel it in the air, the way the temperature dips every few minutes. The faint tremble of the wooden floorboards, the low hum of the wind as it wraps itself around the walls. Frontier storms didn't just arrive. They settled in like long-term guests with questionable manners. You set your cup aside and pull the quilt more firmly over your lap. The fabric is warm from the fire's nearness, but the cabin's corners already carry a creeping chill. The kind that lurks until it finds a way to slip under your collar just when you're feeling comfortable. You rise from the bed and walk slowly across the floor, your boots making soft thuds against the planks. The fire glows bright in the hearth, its flames curling upward in ribbons of orange and gold. You kneel beside it, using the poker to shift the logs until the fire settles into a steady rhythm. The heat brushes your face, soft and constant. In the lighthouse-like glow of the flames, the entire cabin becomes a sanctuary, rough, humble, imperfect, but yours. You remember something old frontier wanderers used to say: a good fire listens before it speaks. Meaning that if you pay attention, the crackles and pops can tell you how well it's burning, what it needs next, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, how long the warmth will last. Tonight, the fire speaks slowly and confidently. A promising sign. You check the kettle next. It gives off a faint, continuous hiss, like a sleepy cat refusing to fully wake. Steam curls up from under the lid in thin spirals. You lift it gently and watch the steam billow. The water inside trembles with tiny bubbles, not quite boiling but close enough to radiate comfort. You pour a little of the hot water into your cup, letting the warm steam thaw the cold off your fingertips. For a moment, all you can hear is the hush of water meeting metal. Then another blast of wind slams against the cabin wall. The entire structure shivers. A loud groan echoes through the rafters. Then a familiar, unsettling thud, snow sliding off the roof in heavy sheets. You set your cup aside and walk to the window. When you lift the cloth, the world beyond the oiled paper looks like a snow-filled void. No shapes, no shadows, just endless white movement. Even the ghostly outlines of trees have vanished. You lower the cloth again, gently. Some sights on the frontier are better admired from a safe emotional distance. With night fully settled and the storm tightening its grip, settlers often entered their watching hours. Not formal watches, just quiet, alert moments between tasks when they listened, prepared, and occasionally worried. Not in a panicked way, but in the practical, familiar manner of people who knew the wilderness respected no one's sleep schedule. You walk a slow circuit around the cabin, checking every vulnerable spot. The door latch holds firm. The quilt is still tucked against the threshold. No drafts sneak from the corners. The chinking between the logs is solid. The roof, so far, is silent, save for the shifting snow. You pause near the far wall and press your hand against it. It feels colder here. Not dangerously cold, but noticeably. You grab a spare blanket from the bed and hang it against the wall, creating another layer of insulation. Early settlers did this, often using fabric, quilts, or even animal hides to block out wind that insisted on finding a way inside. As you secure the blanket, you hear a faint scraping sound above you. A branch, most likely dragged along the roof by the storm's shifting gusts. It moves again, then stops. Settlers often joked that every cabin had its own roof visitor during storms, branches, squirrels, or the occasional raccoon with ambition. You sit back down at the table and allow yourself a slow, deep breath. The fire flickers gently. The lantern glows a warm honey color. The storm growls like a tired giant outside. You take another sip of hot water and close your eyes for a moment. Warmth washes through you. Calm settles into your shoulders. Then you catch another sound, soft, rhythmic, tapping against the cabin. Not the shutter, not the window, not the door. Something outside, lightly brushing the wall. Not threatening, just present. Frontier wisdom says, if a sound repeats in a storm, it has either purpose or persistence. You stand and move closer to the wall where the tapping repeats. Once, twice, then silence. You exhale slowly. Probably a loose branch caught in the swirling snow. Nothing unusual. The storm throws debris around like a bored child rearranging a room. Still, you listen a little longer before stepping away. You return to the hearth and sit on the floor, letting the warmth soak deeply into your bones. You stretch your legs out toward the fire and wiggle your toes inside your boots. Settlers often did this during storms, warming their feet not for comfort alone, but because frostbite had an unfriendly habit of appearing faster than expected. You lean back against the bed frame and watch the flames dance. Their movement is slow and steady, almost musical. Sparks lift and vanish, embers shift quietly, logs sigh as they settle into ash. Outside, the wind rises again high, eerie, carrying a long, sweeping roar that circles the cabin like a great invisible wave. Snow slams into the walls in bursts. The storm has reached its crescendo. Inside, the cabin holds steady. The fire glows brighter. Your breath stays even. And through the long frontier night, you keep watch not out of fear, but out of that quiet, sturdy instinct settlers carried. If the world grows wild, you grow calm. If the wind howls, you listen. If the darkness presses close, you give it light. The storm rages on, but you stay warm, you stay steady, and you stay ready for whatever the night decides to bring next. You shift slightly where you sit on the floor, feeling the warmth of the fire pulse steadily against your boots while the rest of the cabin cools around you. Outside, the storm begins to change. Not weaken, just change. Its howling becomes less of a roar and more of a long, low hum, like the sky is catching its breath. Snow still flies, scraping and pattering against the walls, but the rhythm has softened into something almost hypnotic. You take a slow breath, letting your shoulders unwind. This part of the storm, the long, muffled middle, was always the trickiest for settlers. Not the violent beginning, not the relieved ending, but this strange, suspended quiet. A moment when the storm seems to pause and look around, deciding whether to continue, destroying things, or go take a nap. You stand and stretch your legs, the floorboards creaking under your boots. The lantern sways slightly on its hook, flickering as if responding to the storm's shift. You walk to the window and lift the cloth again. The oiled paper is coated with frost now, glowing faintly as the lantern light behind you scatters across the crystalline surface. You can't make out anything beyond it, just faint shadows of movement and the suggestion of snowfall swirling in thick curtains. You drop the cloth gently and step back. The cabin feels smaller somehow, quieter, as if it's listening with you. Settlers often wrote about this moment, the hollow hour, they called it. A strange lull in the storm, when silence pressed in around you, forcing you to hear things you normally ignored. The soft crack of the fire, your own breathing, the tiny shudder of the logs as the temperature shifted, the subtle tapping of snow sliding down the roof. You walk toward the hearth and sit on the edge of the bed again. The quilt bunches under your weight, rustling quietly. You stir the fire with the poker, watching the embers glow brighter. The cabin fills with the earthy scent of burning pine, a smell that has accompanied generations through difficult winters, cramped nights, and long storms. The kettle lets out a soft, dissatisfied sigh of steam. You lift it, pour a little hot water into your cup, and hold it between both hands. The warmth spreads into your palms, a small reassurance in a world that currently feels like one big icy question mark. You sip the water slowly. The steam curls around your face, warming your nose and cheeks. The sound of the storm fades even further, swallowed by the dense snowfall outside. It's as if the world has been wrapped in thick wool, muting everything. For a brief moment, you sit very still, and you hear nothing. True, complete quiet. The kind that expands in your chest and makes you realize just how alive the silence of the frontier can be. You're reminded of something else settlers used to say. Silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything waiting. You set your cup down, and then you hear it a single, soft crack somewhere outside. Not thunder, not wind. Something shifting under the weight of snow. You hold your breath, listening. Another crack, then stillness. Probably a tree limb giving way under the snow's weight. It happens all the time during winter storms. But the sound lingers in your mind longer than it should, like a distant echo of something bigger. Frontier nights had a way of making every sound feel significant. Especially when the rest of the world was so quiet, you could almost hear your heartbeat. You decide to move again. Quiet storms make people restless. You grab the lantern from its hook and walk a slow circle around the cabin interior. Light spills across the walls, revealing the faint patterns in the wood grain, the swirls, the flay, knots, the scars from axes and tools. Each mark tells a tiny story. You trace a few with your fingertips. You stop near the door and check the latch again. Still firm. The quilt still blocks the draft. The wood around the frame feels cold, but not dangerously so. You reinforce one corner of the quilt with a small wedge of cloth, pressing it firmly against the floor. As you stand again, you notice a thin line of frost forming near the bottom of the door. It glitters faintly in the lantern light. Settlers had an old trick for this. They'd heat flat stones by the fire and place them along the base of the wall to create a slow, radiant warmth. A tiny barrier against creeping cold. You decide to try it. You move to the hearth and pick up one of the warm stones you left earlier. Wrapped in a scrap of cloth, it radiates steady heat. You carry it carefully to the door and place it near the frost line. The ice instantly softens, melting into a bead of water that trickles quietly toward the floorboard. Well, that's one small victory for tonight. You return to the fire and sit again, feeling the warmth soak deeply into your bones. Outside, the storm continues its silent drift. Snow whispers against the roof in feathery sweeps. A low moan of wind curls around the cabin before fading into stillness. You take another sip from your cup and close your eyes. The long frontier night stretches ahead. But in this quiet middle, wrapped in warmth and soft lamplight, you feel the world pause with you. You breathe in deeply the scent of pine, smoke, wool, and warm iron. And for just a moment, despite the storm pressing on every wall, the quiet feels gentle, like the world is holding its breath with you. The silence settles so deeply around the cabin that you begin to notice the small, familiar sounds inside it. The soft ticking of cooling metal on the kettle, the faint sigh of the fire each time a log shifts, the almost imperceptible rustle of the quilt near your feet as it adjusts to the warming air. The storm has quieted into a thick, muffled blanket, turning the outside world into a distant dream. But you know better than to relax completely. Late-night storms on the frontier were never simple pauses. They were intervals, moments when the weather regrouped, reconsidered, and often returned with fresh determination. You ease yourself off the bed and stand slowly, lantern in hand. A tiny pool of warm light follows you as you walk across the cabin. The wooden floor is cool, but not cold enough to bite yet. You kneel beside the hearth and add another small log to the fire, just enough to keep the flames lively without burning through the precious larger pieces too quickly. One of the quieter survival tricks settlers relied on was pacing the fire gently, like keeping rhythm with a sleeping child. Push too hard, and you waste fuel. Ease too much, and the cold wins. You adjust the kettle slightly so the hot water stays warm but doesn't boil over. Steam curls up, drifting toward the rafters, where it vanishes like a ghost changing its mind. The air smells faintly of pine, iron, and the stew from hours earlier warm scents that turn the tiny cabin into a pocket of comfort amid roaring wilderness. You turn toward the shelf where your tools rest. Several items lie scattered across it. A small knife, a bundle of twine, a piece of polished horn you use as a handle, and a few wooden pegs you carved on quieter afternoons. Night was often the time settlers repaired tools when the storm forced them indoors and their hands needed something to do. Something calm, simple, rhythmic. You pick up the small knife, running your thumb carefully along the dull edge. It needs sharpening. You reach for the flat stone you keep wrapped in cloth beneath the shelf. Sitting near the fire, you begin to draw the blade against the stone slowly, quietly, in even strokes. The metal makes a faint rasping sound with each pass, like the whisper of turning pages. It's strangely soothing. The kind of task that steadies your breath without asking much from your mind. Outside, a gust hits the cabin again, hard enough to rattle the shutters, but not as ferocious as before. The wind's voice rises in a long, tired howl before settling back into its quieter rhythm. You pause your sharpening and listen. The storm hasn't gained strength, at least not yet. Still, the frontier taught its own rule. Never assume a storm is done until it leaves your doorstep. You return to the blade, continuing the gentle scraping motion. The fire's light gleams subtly along the metal surface, catching the curve of the edge. Your hands work calmly, your body easing into the kind of peace that comes from simple labor. When the knife's edge is sharp enough to catch the light, you wipe it clean on a scrap of cloth and set it aside. One more tool ready for tomorrow, whatever tomorrow chooses to be. You glance at the wall where your coat hangs, checking it for dampness. The bottom edge is still a little wet from your earlier trips outside. In storms like this, wet clothing is the enemy. It steals heat from your body faster than wind alone. You take the coat off its peg and set it near the hearth, far enough to avoid damage, but close enough to dry. You move next to the rope you use for the cabin's outer shutter. You coil it neatly, check it for fraying, then hang it back on its peg. These little tasks might seem trivial, but frontier folk treated them like sacred rituals because sometimes the smallest overlooked detail was the one that caused the biggest trouble. As you work, you notice something hanging from one of the rafters, a small bundle of dried herbs tied together with rough twine. You almost forgot it was there: sage, yarrow, and a sprig of juniper. Frontier families often hung herbs inside during storms, partly to dry them, partly for their scent, and partly because some believed they warded off illness carried in cold air. Historians still debate whether this practice was based on observation or superstition, but the cabin smells wonderfully earthy because of it, so you decide nature can win this argument. You give the herbs a gentle tap, releasing a faint scent of dry leaves and wild fields. It blends with the aroma of burning pine, creating a smell that feels older than the cabin itself, warm, honest, grounding. Then you hear a sound that pulls you from your thoughts. A faint drip. Just one. Then another. You turn toward the corner near the stone chimney. A small bead of melted snow falls from the ceiling, lands on the floor, and disappears into the wood grain. You crouch and inspect the spot. It's not a leak yet, just condensation gathering where the warm air from the fire meets the cold roof, common in storms like this. Still, you take a handful of dry cloths from the shelf and set them nearby. A frontier trick. Be ready for the problem before it becomes one. You make a mental note to reinforce that spot when the storm passes. The roof has held well so far, but storms have a way of finding small weaknesses and pressing them until they become loud ones. You stand again and walk slowly back to the hearth, feeling the warmth grow as you approach. The fire crackles, sending out a welcoming wave of heat that softens your expression and relaxes your jaw. You sit on the floor again, legs stretched out, hands resting on your knees. The storm rumbles outside, but the middle of the night quiet holds. The cabin feels sturdier now, calmer, as though the very act of tending to its needs has strengthened its resolve. You breathe deeply, letting the warmth fill your chest. The fire glows. The lantern hums softly. The night presses close, but not unkindly. You take in the moment simple, warm, safe enough. And in this long frontier night, with the storm circling and the world wrapped in white, you feel a quiet certainty grow. You have done what you can. You are ready for the rest. You sit quietly by the fire, letting its soft glow fill the space around you. For a moment, the cabin feels suspended in a pocket of warmth separate from the wildness outside, untouched by the blizzard pressing against the walls. But the frontier has a way of reminding you that peace is never permanent. It lasts only long enough for you to start trusting it. Then the wind decides to speak again. The first warning comes as a low, distant rumble so faint you almost think you imagined it. You tilt your head, listening. The rumble grows, spreading through the cold night air like slow thunder crawling across the sky. Then the wind hits. A sudden, forceful blast slams against the cabin's western wall, hard enough to make the wooden beams shudder. The lantern swings sharply on its hook, throwing long, jagged shadows across the room. Loose dust drifts from a rafter and spirals down like tiny, startled snowflakes. You stand quickly, heart tapping just a bit faster, not fear, exactly. Just that heightened awareness, settlers carried like second nature. You press your palm to the nearest log. It's cold, but steady. The wall flexes slightly under the pressure, then holds. Another gust crashes in louder, angrier, dragging snow and ice across the roof in a rattling sweep. You hear the heavy slide of wet snow shedding off one side of the cabin, followed by a thud against the ground. Frontier storms didn't just howl, they moved across the world, like huge animals, testing every surface they touched. You step to the window and lift the cloth. Nothing but white, and movement, and shadows that might be trees, but could just as easily be your imagination stretching shapes. You lower the cloth again. No need to see the storm to know it's getting worse. You cross to the door and check the latch. Still firm. You press your shoulder gently against the wood, feeling the resistance. The wind pushes back with a steady, determined pressure, as though trying to test your resolve along with the cabin's structure. Settlers used to say that a storm looked for seams, gaps in walls, cracks in the roof, weaknesses in the doorframe. Tonight feels like one of those nights when the storm is inspecting everything you've built, wondering whether it can pry something loose. You move to the hearth and grab one of the hot stones warming near the fire, wrapping it quickly in cloth before placing it along the base of the door, reinforcing the spot you patched earlier. Another stone goes to the far corner of the room, where the draft tries to slip back in like an unwelcome guest with persistence issues. The fire crackles behind you, as though offering encouragement. You add a medium log, watching the flames swell, their glow brightening the cabin. Another gust hits, then another. The storm has found its rhythm again, hard, fast, insistent. You brace yourself near the hearth, listening. Each blast sends vibrations through the logs, deep thuds echoing like the heartbeat of a world made of winter. Snow hisses against the roof. The shutters bang once, then steady themselves. You tighten the scarf around your neck, even inside. Storm winds have a strange way of pulling heat from a room, tugging at every seam, every crack. You cup your hands around the warm bowl from earlier, taking a small sip of leftover broth. It warms your throat and settles into your chest like a small ember. A loud creak sounds above you, sharp, abrupt, too close. You look up quickly, just the roof beams shifting under the snow's weight. Or so you hope. Frontier families had a trick for moments like this. They'd tap the ceiling with a broom handle or long stick to encourage snow to slide off before it built up too heavily. You grab the long-handled tool leaning by the bed, climb onto the edge of the straw mattress, and gently tap the beam nearest the outer wall. A moment of silence follows. Then a massive, muffled hump. Snow drops off the roof in one huge, heavy sheet, sliding past the window with a sound like a wave breaking. The cabin seems to exhale. You do too. Back on the floor, you move through the cabin once more, checking each wall with calm, deliberate movements. Door. Holding. Window. Rattling. But steady. Roof. No leaks. Chinking. Intact. The storm hits again, but this time the cabin feels a little stronger. Maybe it's just your own confidence settling in, or maybe it's the way the firelight fills every corner, pushing back against the cold like a stubborn old friend. You sit back down near the hearth, legs stretched toward the warmth. The flames dance in slow, fluid shapes, casting golden shadows across your boots. The kettle hums gently, rising with soft little hisses and sighs. Another gust comes, but you're ready for it now. The cabin absorbs it. The fire holds steady. Your breath stays calm. You lean your head back against the wooden beam and allow your eyes to soften, not to sleep, but to rest, just a little. The storm may have grown teeth again, but you've braced yourself in all the ways you can. Everything that can be strengthened has been. Everything that can be secured is secured. There's a quiet pride in that, a frontier truth. You cannot stop the storm, but you can meet it with steady hands. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, the fire glows. And somewhere between those two forces, you settle into a calm that feels earned. The storm continues its relentless rhythm, pounding and sweeping across the cabin like an ocean trying to reclaim a lonely ship. But something has shifted. The violence is still there, yes, but beneath it, you sense the slow turning of time. A faint change in pitch, a slight easing of the wind between gusts, a deeper cold settling into the logs. These are the signs settlers recognized without needing clocks. The arrival of the long, heavy hours before dawn. You stand again, stretching your back until a gentle pop rewards your effort. The fire is steady, but you, add a small log anyway. Insurance against the creeping cold. The flames welcome it eagerly, curling around the fresh wood with soft crackles. You lift the kettle slightly to give the coals more room to breathe. A faint plume of steam rises, carrying the scent of warm metal and lingering herbs. The kettle gurgles like a sleepy animal, settling deeper into its nest. Night stretches out around you, thick and layered. You can almost feel the darkness pressing at the windows. Curious, cold, persistent. Frontier nights didn't simply fall. They occupied space. They wrapped around cabins and swallowed distant sounds. Even inside, you feel the weight of the storm humming through the wooden beams like a distant pulse. You walk toward the small shelf near the bed and pull down the old journal tucked into the corner. Its leather cover is cracked and soft from years of handling. Writing was one of the few ways settlers passed time during storm-bound nights, jotting down thoughts, lists, dreams, or simply recording the day so it wouldn't slip into the blur of survival. You sit at the table, lantern soft beside you, and open the journal. The pages smell faintly of smoke and dried flowers, perhaps from the herb bundle above the hearth. You run your finger along the uneven lines of the last entry, written days ago when the weather was calm and your biggest worry involved a stubborn goat and a missing shovel. You pick up a small stub of charcoal and begin to write. Not much, just simple sentences that feel grounding. Cold storm tonight, cabin holding steady, fire strong. I think the roof complained more than I did. A small smile tugs at your mouth. Frontier humor was quiet, dry, and often self-directed, one of the few luxuries that didn't require barter, storage, or hauling. A sudden gust rattles the window frame, reminding you that the storm is far from finished. You pause, listening. The wind moans across the roof in long, wavering notes, the kind that make you instinctively glance upward, even though you know you won't see anything new. You exhale slowly and return to the journal, adding one more line. The storm has its own language. Tonight it is loud. You close the book gently and place it back on the shelf. Writing feels good, steady, grounding, like placing stones along a path so you remember where you've been. You return to the hearth and kneel beside the fire, holding your hands toward the heat. Your palms tingle as warmth seeps into them. Outside, another sheet of snow slides off the roof with a muted thud. The cabin seems to settle a little after the release, logs easing back into place with soft creaks. You stand, walk to the door, and check the latch for the 100th time. Still secure, still stubborn. The quilt at the threshold remains pressed tightly against the wood, though frost has gathered along the bottom edge again. You use one of the warm stones to melt the frost gently before repositioning it. A simple trick, but effective. You walk the cabin's perimeter once more, another habit settlers adopted during harsh nights. A quiet patrol that kept both attention sharp and anxiety manageable. Each log feels solid beneath your palm. The chinking is firm. The floorboards are cold but dry. The air inside, though cooler now, is still far kinder than the world outside. When you reach the window, you lift the cloth again just slightly. Beyond the paper, there is no visibility at all. Only swirling white pressed so close it looks like the storm is breathing against the glass. You lower the cloth quickly. The lantern flickers. The fire hums. Your breath fogs slightly, just enough to make you tuck your collar tighter. You sit on the bed, pulling the quilt across your knees. A faint draft creeps in from somewhere, brushing your ankles with icy curiosity. You pull your legs closer, sitting cross-legged beneath the heavy fabric. The warmth returns quickly, settling around your legs like a gentle animal curled to sleep. Settlers often spent nights like this half awake, half resting, listening more than sleeping. Nights weren't restful so much as watchful. The storm outside is wild, unpredictable, but inside, your careful work holds. The hours pass slowly, marked not by clocks but by sensations. The fire shifts from bright to soft. The logs crackle in deeper tones. The wind rises, then falls, then rises again. Your breath becomes steady, shallow, quiet. The cold presses harder at the walls but never quite breaks through. Even the animals outside, those who burrowed, nested, or hid in hollow logs, are silent now. The whole world feels frozen in place, waiting for the first hint of dawn. You lean your head back against the wall and close your eyes, not to sleep, but to rest just behind your eyelids. You listen to the rhythm of the fire, the soft hum of the lantern, the muted storm beyond. Another obscure frontier tidbit drifts into your mind. Some settlers believed that storms had eyes, quiet places at their centers, where nature paused to think. Historians still debate whether this was early meteorology or imagination filling in the silence. Maybe this moment is one of those quiet places, or maybe it is simply a night that feels longer because you are in the middle of it. Either way, you breathe deeply, steady as the cabin around you. The storm continues, but dawn is moving closer, slowly, quietly, patiently. And you wait with it, warm by the fire, safe inside the walls you've tended so carefully. You're not sure exactly when it happens, only that the storm's voice begins to change. Not fall silent, not weaken completely, just shift. The furious edge softens. The long, teeth-bared gusts ease into slower breaths. The snow no longer claws at the walls, but nestles against them in thick, quiet heaps. You open your eyes and lift your head, sensing the difference in the air before you see any sign of morning. The fire has burned down to the warm bed of coals, glowing like a field of tiny red stars beneath the dark curve of the iron pot. You sit up on the bed, the quilt slipping from your shoulders, and breathe in the softer, warmer scent of the cabin. Smoke, pine, sap, ember, heat still present, still comfortingly familiar. A deep stretch rolls through your spine, satisfying and slightly noisy. Settlers often woke this way on storm mornings, half rested, half surprised they slept at all. You rub your eyes and stand, the floor cool beneath your boots. In the distant corners of the cabin, shadows retreat slowly as the day begins announcing itself in small ways. The faint brightening of the oiled window paper, the subtle bluish tint to the darkness, the quieter breaths of wind against the roof. You walk to the hearth and gently prod the coals with the poker. They respond with a soft, eager glow, like they've been waiting for you. You add a small piece of kindling, then a thin log. It catches quickly, flames rising in, tender curls. A gentle fire for a slow morning. Outside, the storm still hums, but it has lost its restless pulse. The worst has passed. Early settlers learned to read storms like unfolding stories, and this one is now in its final chapter, the long, exhausted sigh after the night's fierce argument with the world. You step toward the window and lift the cloth. The first light of dawn hits your eyes, a soft, muted blue, filtered through snow that clings thickly to the window frame. Beyond the oiled paper, there is nothing but pale glow. No shapes yet, no outlines, just the suggestion of a world beneath a heavy blanket. You lower the cloth gently and let out a slow breath. The storm's ending leaves a strange kind of quiet behind. A peace that feels earned, but also fragile, like it could crumble if you exhale too loudly. You check the door next. The latch is still firm. The quilt along the base has a thin line of frost at the edge, sparkling faintly in the rising light. You lift it and feel the cold whisper through the crack. Gentle now, not insistent. You reposition the quilt and stand. A faint tapping sound reaches your ears. Not wind, not snow, water. You cross the cabin and find it. A tiny bead forming on the beam near the chimney. You place a small wooden bowl beneath it. A frontier trick: catch the water so it doesn't seep unseen into corners where it would freeze and expand. Tomorrow, that spot will need fixing. But that's what tomorrow is for. You take up the kettle and pour some warm water into your cup. The steam swirls upward, catching the soft morning light. You bring the cup to your lips and sip slowly, feeling the warmth spread through your chest like a promise that the day will be kinder than the night before. After a few moments, you prepare a simple breakfast, warming the leftover johnny cake on a flat stone by the fire, then dipping it in the small pot of broth. The flavors are richer than last night, deepened by rest and firelight. Settlers often said, stew tasted best the morning after a storm, when the world outside was colder, but the food inside was warmer. As you eat, you hear the faint creak of the roof, snow settling, shifting, sliding in slow, heavy sheets. You glance up instinctively, then relax. No danger, just morning rearranging the pieces of night. You take another small bite of johnny cake and listen. A crow calls somewhere in the distance, faint, muffled, but undeniably alive. Then another. Birds waking after a storm was always the first real sign that the world had survived the night. You finish eating, wipe your hands, and sit closer to the fire. A steady warmth washes over you. Steam curls from your cup. The lantern hangs dim now, unnecessary but still glowing faintly, as if reluctant to give up its vigil. You close your eyes and breathe deeply, feeling the storm's weight slowly lift from your shoulders. The cabin creaks not in fear, but in the easing relaxation of a structure that has endured something large. You touch the logs near the hearth. They feel warm now, safe. Your own heartbeat is steady. Your breath is even. The long, exhausting night has passed, and dawn has found you waiting, tired, yes, but unbroken. One more frontier truth comes to mind. Something settlers muttered sleepily on mornings like this. The storm takes what it takes. What remains is yours to rebuild. You look around the cabin, its sturdy walls, its patched corners, its glowing hearth, and feel a quiet pride settle in. You have warmth. You have shelter. You have the morning. And as dawn continues to rise behind the snow-covered window, another feeling grows: the simple, steady relief of knowing you made it through the wildest hours. And the day ahead, though uncertain, they will begin with calm. You stand slowly, setting your cup aside as you roll your shoulders and feel the stiffness of a storm-sheltered night loosen its grip. The dawn light, leaking through the oiled paper, grows, brighter, soft silver, almost shy but strong enough to signal that the world outside is no longer the swirling void it was hours ago. The storm hasn't vanished, but it has retreated into that groggy, drifting state that tends to follow its fiercest hours. Time to see what it left behind. You pull on your coat, still warm from its place near the fire, and wrap the wool scarf around your neck. The fabric smells faintly of smoke and pine, an accidental frontier perfume. Your boots are dry, but stiff with cold. You flex your toes, reminding them they still belong to you. Settlers did this often in winter. A quick toe check to make sure nothing important had frozen overnight. A practical ritual, if not glamorous. You walk to the door and place your hand on the latch. The wood is cool, but no longer icy. You take a breath, steadying yourself not in fear, but because stepping outside after a major storm always feels like opening a letter you didn't ask for but must read. You lift the latch, push gently. The door doesn't move, not even a centimeter. You blink, mildly offended by the defiance. Then you push harder. The door budges a little, then stops with a soft, compacted thud. Ah, snow. Several inches, maybe a foot pressed against it from the outside. Classic frontier greeting after a blizzard. You inhale deeply, brace your shoulder, and push again. The wood groans. The hinges complain. And finally, the door cracks open just enough for a slice of white light to pour in. Cold air rushes past you like an enthusiastic dog, eager to explore the cabin. You squint through the narrow gap and see a wall. A white, silent wall of snow packed high against the porch and halfway up the doorframe. Well, you mutter to yourself, that explains that. Settlers dealt with this all the time, but it never stopped being inconvenient. You grab the small shovel leaning beside the hearth. Its handle worn smooth, the metal blade scratched from years of disagreements with frozen earth, and wedge yourself sideways through the narrow opening. The cold hits you instantly. Sharp, pure. A cold that has the audacity to feel honest about it. Your breath turns to thick fog. Your eyelashes gather tiny crystals. The air tastes clean in a way that only freshly storm-scrubbed mornings do. You step onto the porch, or rather, onto the imprint of where the porch used to be. Snow rises nearly to your knees, smooth and untouched, like a perfectly iced cake nobody wants to be the first to slice. The cabin roof holds a thick white layer, sagging a little but still intact to relief. Some roofs didn't make it through storms like this. Your first task is simple, if not cheerful. Dig yourself a doorway. You wedge the shovel into the packed snow and lift. The weight surprises you. Snow from a blizzard isn't the fluffy, friendly kind. It's dense, wet, and personally offended you exist. You toss the first shovelful off the porch, where it lands with a heavy thump. Another shovelful follows, then another. The rhythm settles into you. Lift, toss, breathe. It's strangely meditative, though your back, legs, and shoulders all disagree on the definition of meditative. Settlers use this time to assess storm damage, test the air, listen for any signs of trouble. You do the same. The wind has calmed to a gentle, whispering breeze. The trees stand in silent columns, their limbs bowed under thick coats of snow. A soft mist hangs in the air, tiny crystals drifting lazily downward, undecided about whether they count as snowfall. You keep digging, clearing a path from the door to the ground. The world slowly takes shape again. The stump where you chop wood, crowned in white, the fence around the chicken pen, nearly buried, the roofline of the neighbor's cabin barely visible through the haze. And then you hear it. A faint cluck. You straighten, shovel in hand, and look toward the pen. The chickens, somehow, are alive and extremely offended. 3 little heads poke above the snowbank, like grumpy feathered periscopes judging your timing. You trudge toward the pen, carving a narrow path with each trudging step. Your boots sink deep, the snow hugging your shins with icy enthusiasm. When you reach the fence, you laugh softly despite everything. The chickens stand on a small island of snow, puffed up like irritated pom-poms. One of them stomps its feet repeatedly, sending silent accusations your way. "Good morning to you too," you murmur. You clear the entrance to the pen, scoop away enough snow to open their gate, and check that their little shelter hasn't collapsed. It hasn't. Frontier carpentry sometimes worked miracles by accident. You toss grain into the cleared space, and the chickens immediately forget their grievances. Food is a universal diplomat. From behind you, the trees creak, their heavy, snow-laden branches shifting slightly as the warming air starts to lighten their load. Snow falls from the highest limb of a pine with a soft whump, sending up a tiny, shimmering cloud. A strange calm spreads across the clearing. The storm has passed. The world is still standing. And so are you. You pause, shovel planted in the snow, and take in the landscape slowly. Everything is hushed and bright. The sun, still low, reflects off the snow in waves of silver-blue light. The horizon glows faintly golden. You feel the cold deep in your bones, but you also feel something else. That quiet pride that comes only from outlasting the night. The frontier didn't reward bravery, but it had immense respect for perseverance. You breathe deeply, lungs filling with icy, clean air, and turn back toward the cabin to continue digging. There is work left to do, yes. The day will be long, but the worst has passed. And in the soft, silvery hush of morning, you feel steady, grounded, and ready for whatever comes next. You turn back toward the cabin, shovel in hand, and continue working your way through the heavy snow. Each step feels like wading through cold syrup. Slow, resistant, determined to keep you exactly where you're standing. But you push on, cutting a narrow path from the yard back to the porch. The storm left more than snowdrifts behind. It left a checklist of small damages, each one waiting patiently for your attention. Frontier mornings after a blizzard weren't gentle resets. They were inventories. When you reach the porch, you clear the last of the snow from the doorway and step inside to warm your hands by the fire. Your fingers sting as sensation returns tiny needles pricking your skin in a way that says, "Thanks for not letting us freeze off." The fire crackles softly, almost proud of itself for having survived the night alongside you. You remove your coat briefly and hang it near the hearth to dry the new layer of frost clinging to the hem. Then, once your hands no longer feel like they've been sculpted from ice, you pull the coat back on and step outside again to face the next task. Repairs. Storms had a talent for finding every weakness a cabin possessed. Where the wind couldn't enter, it attacked from above. Where the snow couldn't pile, it pressed from the sides. And anything that wobbled even slightly the day before now leans with meaningful guilt. You begin with the shutters. The one on the north side hangs crooked, its rope stretched and frayed from the wind thrashing it throughout the night. You run your hand along the wood, cold, rough, wet. The frame beneath is still solid, but the hinge is loose. You pull a wooden peg from your coat pocket, one of the little tools you carved on quieter nights, and tap it into place with the back of your knife. The hinge straightens. The shutter presses firmly against the wall again, no longer rattling like a nervous musician waiting to perform. Next, you inspect the chinking between the logs. Most of it held, but one seam near the corner appears softer, worn slightly where the wind managed to claw at it. You crouch and run your fingers across the gap. A thin thread of cold air snakes through it, brushing your skin. You gather a handful of snow from the ground, not for cooling, but for testing. You press it against the seam. The snow melts quickly and evenly, revealing a slow but steady leak of warm air from inside. Settlers use this trick often. If the snow melted too fast, the cabin was leaking heat. You rise and fetch the small bucket of patching clay you keep under the porch, protected from frost by a layer of straw. The mixture is crude: clay, fine moss, bits of straw. But it works as well as mortar when pressed into the gaps between logs. You scoop some onto your fingers and smear it across the seam, pushing it firmly into place. The wind stops immediately, as if irritated you noticed its little doorway. You nod, satisfied. One more weakness handled, then your eyes drift toward the roof. A ridge of snow sits thick along the edge, heavy enough to make the beams creak again. If you leave it, the next round of melting and freezing could warp the boards or leak into the cabin. You grab the long-handled tool you used last night to knock loose the snow and climb onto the lower rung of the porch rail, steadying yourself. You tap the roof gently, once, twice, working your way along the edge. Snow drops in slow, heavy curtains, each fall landing with a satisfying whump that sends tiny glittering crystals into the air. With each patch cleared, you hear the roof sigh, quiet, but unmistakably relieved. As you work, you catch movement from the corner of your vision. A neighbor. He trudges across his own yard, half buried in snow, up to his knees, waving a hand above his head. The gesture is slow, friendly, if exhausted. You lift your arm in return. Frontier neighbors didn't exchange long conversations after storms. They exchanged waves that asked and answered the same question. "You made it?" "Yes." "And you?" You watch him continue on, scouting the damage to his own cabin. For a moment, you feel the familiar comfort of shared hardship, the sense that even in this vast, cold world, you're not entirely alone. You finish clearing the roof's edge and drop back down to the porch, boots thudding softly against the wood. The air is still cold enough to bite, but warm enough to spare your lungs from stabbing you with each breath. The sun, still pale, climbs steadily through the sky, giving the world a ghostly glow. You take the shovel again and make your way toward the woodpile. The storm buried it under a thick, white mound. You laugh under your breath, a tired, wry sound. You spent so long stacking that wood yesterday, only for the storm to hide it like a mischievous raccoon hiding its favorite snacks. You dig until the first few logs reveal themselves, slick with a thin sheen of frost. You brush the snow off and carry them, inside, stacking them near the hearth. The fire welcomed them with a low hiss, steam rising as the frost melts. One by one, you check the rest of the cabin exterior. The fence around the pen is crooked, but intact. The water bucket near the creek froze over entirely. A fallen branch lies across the path, half buried, needing removal later. Your footprints from earlier are already half filled with drifting snow. The world outside looks unfamiliar, reshaped by the storm into soft contours and buried lines. But it's stable, quiet, no longer moving with the restless energy of the night. When you finally step back inside, the fire greets you like a friend holding out a warm blanket. You close the door gently behind you and listen. No rattling, no drafts, no whining hinge. Everything holds. You peel off your coat, letting the warmth settle around your shoulders like sunlight. Your breath releases slowly, no longer fogging the air. There is still much to do. But for now the moment you stand inside a sturdy cabin that weathered the storm. And you feel something rare on the frontier. Not just relief, but quiet satisfaction. You linger by the fire for a moment, letting the warmth soak into your coat and settle into your bones. Your breath finally stops drifting visibly from your mouth, a sign that the cabin, patched and reinforced, is winning its morning battle against the cold. Outside the window, the pale light continues to strengthen, turning the snow from silver to soft white. It's the kind of glow that makes everything look still, innocent, even though you know the world is anything but. After a night like that, the frontier always demanded a return to routine. Slowly, steadily, as if reminding everyone, storms may disrupt, but life continues. And if you don't keep pace with it, well, nature simply shrugs and continues without you. You pull on your coat again, still warm but stiff with melted frost, and grab your gloves from the peg. One glove is damp along the seam. You tug it on anyway, flexing your fingers until the leather softens a little. The scarf comes next, wrapped twice around your neck. You take a deep breath, reach for the latch, and step back out into the freshly sculpted world. The cold greets you like an old acquaintance, brisk, opinionated, but not hostile the way it was last night. The air is shockingly clear now, crisp in a way that makes your teeth ache if you inhale too sharply. Every sound is sharper too, your boots squeaking in the fresh snow, the distant creak of ice on the creek, the gentle crack of a tree limb shedding another layer of powder. You squint against the brightness as sunlight reflects with ruthless enthusiasm off the snow. Settlers often joked that winter mornings were nature's way of giving everyone a free migraine. You shade your eyes with one hand and make your way toward the small shed behind the cabin. The shed's roof bowed under the storm, but it held. A good sign. You brush snow off the door with your arm and tug it open. Inside, tools sit exactly where you left them, stacked, hanging, leaning, and generally pretending they didn't spend the night listening to the storm batter the walls. You grab the small hatchet, a coil of rope, and a wooden bucket. Today will be about restoring rhythm. Fresh water, wood sorting, checking the path, seeing whether any animals need rescuing from bad decisions. You sling the rope over your shoulder and head toward the creek. The landscape has transformed into a quiet expanse of white, interrupted only by the dark spines of trees and the sharp angles of the cabin behind you. Your boots sink deep into the snow with each step, leaving crisp impressions that would make any tracking animal very happy. When you reach the creek, you find it sealed under a firm sheet of ice. Not the thin crust from yesterday, but a thick, opaque layer formed during the storm's coldest hours. You kneel and tap the surface with your glove. Solid. Thick enough to hold weight, but not thick enough to trust blindly. You take the hatchet and begin chopping a small circle, striking carefully to avoid shattering the edge. Each blow sends a satisfying crack through the ice. A few chips scatter across the surface like broken glass catching the morning light. Beneath, you hear the soft echo of moving water, muffled but present. A reminder that life continues underneath, even the hardest freeze. When the ice finally gives, you scoop the broken pieces aside with your boot and lower the bucket into the dark opening. The water rushes in, clean, frigid, impossibly clear. You pull the bucket back up, using the rope, careful not to spill. As you stand again, you hear something faint behind you, a soft, irregular crunching in the snow. You turn your head slowly. The deer stands at the tree line, half shadowed, half golden, in the growing light. Its fur is puffed against the cold, its breath streaming in quiet plumes. The animal watches you with calm curiosity, the kind that frontier animals often had when they realized you were far too tired to pose a threat. You breathe quietly, letting the moment stretch. Sometimes, after storms, animals wandered close to human homesteads, not for food, but because everything smelled warmer and safer. Settlers wrote about it often. Rabbits hiding under porches, elk resting near barns, even wolves lingering silently at the edges of lantern light. Nature seeking nature, in its own strange way. The deer flicks its ears once, then lifts its head and walks away silently into the trees. You watch it until it disappears, a soft brown shape fading into white stillness. You carry the bucket back toward the cabin, feet crunching through the path you carved earlier. The sunlight brightens, warming your face just enough to remind you how long winter days can be, even the cold ones. When you reach the cabin, you push the door open with a boot and step inside. The warmth envelops you, instantly, like a blanket thrown around your shoulders. You set the bucket near the hearth and rub your hands together, restoring the feeling to your fingers. Then you move to the woodpile indoors and begin sorting it. Some logs are dry enough to use immediately. Others, still damp from last night's storm, need time near the fireplace to shed their ice. Settlers often called this warming the wood. Even though the logs never got truly warm, they just stopped being dangerously cold. As you stack the driest pieces near the hearth, you think again about the rhythm of frontier life. Storms may be dramatic, but the days afterward, the rebuilding, the reordering, the small, necessary chores are where survival actually happens. In the quiet work, the repetitive work, the work that has no applause but matters all the same. You take up the broom next and sweep the newly melted snow and bits of frost from the floor near the door. The straw bristles whisper against the wood. The cabin feels steadier with each stroke, cleaner, warmer, more yours again. Outside, the storm's remnants glitter in the growing light. Inside, your little world regains its shape, one small task at a time. And as the day stretches ahead, long, cold, but calm, you feel the old frontier truth settle comfortably into your chest. Endurance isn't loud, it's quiet, steady, repetitive, the art of reclaiming a day after the world tries to take it from you. You step outside again once the cabin is warm and orderly, letting the door fall shut behind you with a soft thud. The air has changed since dawn, still biting, still sharp enough to sting your throat on the first breath, but calmer now. Clearer. The sun climbs a little higher, throwing long blue shadows across the snow like painted brushstrokes. You stand still for a moment on the porch, letting your eyes adjust to the brightness. The landscape around you looks almost mythical in its new stillness. Snow smooths every rough edge, hides every stump and root, and covers the world in a thick, forgiving blanket. The storm erased sharp lines and replaced them with soft curves, gentle drifts, bent branches, and ridges that look like wind-sculpted dunes. But beneath all that beauty lies practical truth. Storms change the land, paths shift, water rises or hides. And if you don't pay attention, the land will surprise you in ways you really don't want. You grab your walking stick, a sturdy length of oak, polished by years of necessity, and begin making your way toward the narrow trail leading into the woods. The stick sinks through the snow with each step, testing depth, looking for hidden dangers under the white surface. Settlers often use sticks like this to avoid stumbling into drifts or stepping onto thin ice patches, disguised as solid ground. The trail is nearly invisible now, buried beneath inches of snow and wind-made ridges, but you know where it should be, just past the pen, curving right around the big pine that looks like it's permanently shrugging. You head that way, leaving a neat line of footprints behind you. As you walk, the forest slowly reveals itself. Not with sound, the woods are almost silent, but with tiny hints. A broken branch jutting from a drift, a tuft of fur on a low limb, the faint track of a rabbit zigzagging across your path. You crouch to study the tracks more closely. The pattern suggests the rabbit was in a hurry, small, quick hops, then a sudden change of direction, probably startled, possibly by the same storm that startled you. Or maybe by the neighbor's dog, who believes he's a wolf despite weighing less than the average winter boot. You stand again and continue along the hidden trail. Branches hang heavy with snow, dipping low enough that you occasionally brush them aside or receive an unexpected sprinkle of powder down your neck. You mutter softly at the cold surprise, which is an ancient frontier tradition. The deeper you walk, the more you notice the storm's footprint. A small spruce has fallen across the trail, its roots torn from the softened earth. You clear a path around it, marking the spot with a small branch so you remember to return later with a saw. Frontier navigation often required memory more than maps, making mental notes of what shifted, what broke, what moved during the night. Farther along, you reach the small clearing where you set your traps the day before. Snow covers nearly everything, forming soft mounds that disguise their shapes. You use your stick to brush away the top layer, revealing one trap still empty but intact. You reset it and move to the next. Under the snow, the second trap holds a small imprint of paw. Marks, light, delicate, suggesting a fox sniffed it, then chose to reconsider its life choices. Sensible creature. The trap itself is empty. You reset it as well, checking the mechanism carefully. A breeze stirs the treetops, sending a curtain of snow drifting down in shimmering flakes. As they fall, the silence deepens again. You pause, standing perfectly still. Even your breath feels loud in the hush. This is one of those frontier moments people wrote about in old letters, when the world goes silent not from peace, but from attention. As if the land is listening to you as intently as you are listening to it. You close your eyes for a brief moment and simply breathe. Cold air fills your lungs, sharp but clean. The scent of pine lingers in the breeze. The world waits. Then a soft creak echoes from somewhere ahead. You open your eyes and turn toward the sound. A birch tree leans precariously under the weight of snow. A long, slender trunk bent like a bowstring under tension. Ice coats its branches, glittering like glass. You know immediately this is trouble waiting to happen. Settlers called these widow-makers trees that, once cracked, could fall with barely a whisper. You give the tree a wide berth, circling carefully through the deeper snow. As you pass, a slow but audible crrrr sounds from inside the trunk. You don't wait to hear the rest. You keep moving until the sound fades. You reach the edge of the clearing, where the trail bends back toward your cabin. From this vantage, you can see the faint smoke rising from your chimney in the distance. A thin grey ribbon curling into the cold blue sky. It's a reassuring sight, one that frontier families cherished, the first visible sign that home survived the storm, and that warmth still waits inside. Before turning back, you crouch again and examine the snow near the base of a cedar. Strange marks appear small, round holes in pairs, evenly spaced. A bird? No. A snowshoe hare. You smile slightly. A less common visitor, fast and elusive. A frontier fact. Snowshoe hares' feet act like natural skis, letting them skim across snow that would swallow other animals whole. Historians still debate whether settlers learned more from watching hares or squirrels about winter survival. Personally, the hares seem more reliable. You stand again and turn back toward the cabin, following your earlier footprints. The return walk feels easier, partly because the path is broken, partly because the sun warms your back just enough to soften the bite of the cold. The forest stillness feels friendlier now, no longer tense with storm energy. When you reach the yard, your cabin stands where you left it, solid, warm, smoke curling gently upward. You step onto the porch, brush the snow from your boots, and open the door. Warmth greets you instantly. The fire glows steady. Inside the cabin, your breath relaxes in your chest. Home, life after a storm isn't glamorous. It's patient, careful, attentive. You've checked the land. It's changed, but safe. And the day finally begins to feel like yours again. You shut the cabin door behind you and lean your walking stick against the wall, feeling the warmth inside settle around you like a soft blanket. The air still carries the scent of smoke and thawing wood, a gentle reminder that the fire has done its part faithfully through the night. You pull off your gloves and rub your hands together, restoring the feeling to your fingertips. Outside, the sun climbs higher, brightening the oiled window paper until the whole square glows like a muted lantern. Inside, morning has finally taken hold slowly, quietly, but firmly enough that you feel the first flutter of something like normal returning. Now comes the part of the day settlers knew intimately, restoring strength, not through naps or leisure, those were luxury, but through the calm, steady work that rebuilds both home and spirit after a long storm. You move toward the hearth and crouch beside the coals. Though the fire still burns, The largest logs have turned to soft, glowing embers. You add a split piece of pine, then a small knot of hardwood on top, creating a careful balance that will burn long and warm. The flames lick upward, brightening the room, with their sleepy confidence. A soft bubbling sound reaches your ears. You lift the lid of the kettle. The water inside shimmers with tiny beads of steam, suitable for tea or for softening the leftover stew that thickened overnight into something with the consistency of frontier cement. You ladle a portion of the stew into a wooden bowl and set it near the fire to warm. While you wait, you take a good look around the cabin, noticing details the dim stormlight had hidden last night. A thin scattering of ash near the hearth, a trail of melted snow where your boots had dripped earlier, a pile of tools slightly askew from the hurried repairs. None of it urgent, all of it gently asking for attention. You reach for the broom and begin sweeping the floor in smooth strokes. Dust, bits of bark, and tiny fragments of straw gather into a small pile that you scoop into a wooden tray. The soft whisper of the broom bristles against the floor feels grounding, simple, repetitive, reliable. Settlers swore by simple chores like this, not because they enjoyed them, but because predictable work steadied the mind after unpredictable weather. You wipe down the table next, brushing off the crumbs from yesterday's Johnny cake. The grainy scent rises faintly, reminding you of warm mornings and calmer days. You fold a spare cloth and tuck it neatly into the corner, straightening the tin cup and wooden spoon beside it. By the time you're done tidying, the bowl near the fire sends up faint curls of steam. You sit at the table and take a slow bite. The stew tastes richer, deeper, storm-enhanced, as settlers often joked. The flavors that felt modest yesterday have finally melted together into something hearty and undeniably comforting. As you eat, wind whistles softly outside, not the fierce, teeth-bared howl of last night, but a gentler, curious breeze brushing against the walls as though checking in. Snow slides from the roof in periodic whumps, each one sending a set, tiny vibration through the cabin floorboards. The storm's remnants rearranging themselves. You finish your meal and stand, stretching until your shoulders pop. The next task waits outside, sorting the wood you dug from the snow earlier. Not glamorous, not exciting, but necessary. You pull your coat and gloves back on and step into the cold again. The yard has shifted in the sunlight crystals, in the snow sparkling like crushed glass, branches glistening under their icy coats. You walk to the woodpile and crouch beside it. Some logs are soaked near the ends from melting snow. You set these aside to dry later. Others are still solid, their bark flaking beneath your touch. These you stack neatly under the porch overhang, arranging them in alternating layers so air can circulate through the pile. A small frontier trick. Placing rougher bark upward, so rain or melting snow slides off, not into the grain. You take a deep breath, the cold filling your lungs in a way that feels strangely invigorating. The storm stripped the world bare, but it also sharpened it, made the air clearer, the lines cleaner, the quiet deeper. When the pile is organized, you stand and stretch again, admiring the returning sense of order. Each little task today stitches the world back together, one log, one path, one breath at a time. Then you hear a familiar clucking sound. You turn. The chickens stand near the fence, bright-eyed and expectant, as if they've decided enough time has passed since the storm for you to resume your responsibilities. You laugh quietly and head over, scattering a handful of grain into the cleared space. They rush at it with dramatic enthusiasm, tiny feet skittering over packed snow. One chicken hops awkwardly onto a nearby drift, sinks halfway, and then stares at you as if you personally invented snow to inconvenience her. You sigh and gently scoop her out, setting her on firmer ground. Settlers wrote in journals about chickens behaving with theatrical indignation after storms. You can confirm this is still historically accurate behavior. You check the pen. The wooden beams are bent but stable. A bit of rope has frayed near the top, nothing urgent, but another item added to your mental list. One by one, you observe the animal's behavior. The chickens peck and shuffle. Your goat, who has emerged from her shelter, shakes off snow with a huffy snort. No wild animals linger nearby. The storm pushed them deeper into the woods. Satisfied, you return to the porch and sit on the top step. The snow crunches beneath you, cold but tolerable. You rest your elbows on your knees and breathe in deeply. The world is quiet. calm, fragile, but healing. Your heartbeat slows, your breath steadies. You feel the rhythm of the day returning gentle, determined, practical. A frontier truth comes to mind, one settler said, often on days like this. After surviving the night, you rebuild the day, one small act at a time. And so you do. With quiet work. With calm hands. With a patient, steady heart. You sit on the porch for a few minutes longer, letting the cold air nibble at your cheeks while the sun slowly rises higher. The light spreads across the snow in pale ribbons, reflecting upward and filling the world with a kind of gentle brightness that almost makes you forget how much force the storm carried last night. Almost. The clearing around your cabin looks different now, softened, quieted, reshaped into smooth white lines. Every footprint you made earlier stands out clearly, the only signs of movement in an otherwise untouched world. The storm erased nearly everything else. You stand and brush the snow from your coat, ready to head inside and continue your quiet work, when you hear it. A sound breaking the stillness. A sharp, rhythmic crunching of snow. Human footsteps. You turn in the direction of the sound, instinctively straightening your posture. Out here, footsteps after a storm always mattered. They meant something had shifted, someone had survived, someone needed help, or someone simply wanted to check in. A figure approaches slowly from the tree line, bundled in a thick fur coat, hat pulled low, walking stick tapping softly with each step. Your neighbor, the same neighbor you waved to earlier from a distance, now trudging directly toward your yard, cheeks red from the cold, scarf wrapped around his face until only his eyes peek through. He raises a hand as he approaches, and you raise yours in response. It's a simple greeting, but one that carries weight out here. I'm alive, you're alive. Let's confirm it together. He reaches the fence, leans heavily on his walking stick, and lowers his scarf. His breath fogs the air between you in two thick white plumes. Storm hit hard, he says, voice hoarse but steady. You nod. Hard enough. He glances around your clearing, taking in the freshly shoveled paths, the cleared roofline, the woodpile sitting in neat order under the porch. A faint smile touches his lips. Your place held up, better than most. You arch an eyebrow. And yours? He exhales sharply, something between a laugh and a cough. Still standing. Lost a shutter, though. Found it half a mile down the ridge this morning. You shake your head sympathetically. Storms scattered belongings like mischievous children rearranging furniture. You knew of one settler whose hat blew so far during a blizzard he found it days later frozen to a tree like a confused ornament. Need help putting it back, you ask? He shrugs. I'll manage. Just came to check you made it through. You feel something warm settle in your chest. Frontier neighbors didn't always talk much. They didn't always visit. But when they did, it mattered. It meant they were stitching the world back together after the storm, one voice at a time. He shifts his weight and gestures toward your cabin. Saw smoke from your chimney. A good sign. Better than none, you reply. You offer him a warm drink, motioning toward the cabin, but he shakes his head gently. Not today. I've got fences to fix, and the creek behind my place nearly overflowed. After last night, I believe it. He adjusts his scarf again, tugging it up over his face. If you need anything, rope, grain, a hand, send word. You nod. Same to you. He lifts his walking stick in parting and turns back toward the woods, footprints trailing behind him in crisp little patterns. You watch him until he disappears between the white dusted branches. His visit leaves a quiet comfort lingering in the air. Human voices after a storm do that. They remind you that you're part of something. Even out here where the world feels large and indifferent. You step off the porch and walk the perimeter of your clearing again, not because you expect danger now, but because something about the neighbor's visit reminds you of the old frontier habit of checking the land twice after a storm. The first check is for survival. The second is for to the future. Your boots sink deep into the snow as you walk. The sun glints on the frozen world, making everything sparkle as though the storm covered the land in powdered glass. You begin near the creek. The water flows in slow, clear ribbons beneath a crust of ice, thicker now than before. You test the edge with your walking stick. Solid, but fragile near the bank. You make note of it, you'll need water later. and the ice will only grow thicker by nightfall. Farther along, you spot the fallen branch from earlier. With a few careful swings of your hatchet, you clear it from the path, dragging it aside where it won't trip you in the days ahead. The trunk is split near the base, a reminder that the storm found every weakness, even among the trees. You continue on, circling back toward the cabin. Near the big pine, the snow thins enough for you to see old tracks deer from early morning, weaving through the trees in wide arcs. And behind them, you crouch. Fox tracks. Small, direct, purposeful. Heading toward your traps and then turning away again. An animal with good instincts. And better timing. You rise and continue walking, listening to the crunch of snow beneath your boots. The cold air nips at your cheeks. The sun rises higher still, and slowly, the world shifts back into something familiar, reshaped but recognizable. When you reach the cabin again, you brush the snow from your shoulders and pause, taking in the sight before you. The sturdy walls, the warm, faint wisp of chimney smoke, the freshly shoveled doorway, the glint of sunlight on frost. Human voices have returned to the day. Not many, not loudly, but enough to remind you that solitude doesn't mean isolation, and survival doesn't mean silence. You step back inside, letting the warmth close around you like a welcome embrace. The storm has passed, your neighbor has checked in, and you have begun to reclaim the world, one careful step at a time. By the time the sun begins its slow descent toward the treetops, the day has settled into a calm, deliberate rhythm. The storm may have reshaped the land, but you've spent the daylight hours reshaping your place within it. The cabin feels cleaner, warmer, steadier. The woodpile is stocked, the animals fed, the trails checked, the small damages mended. Now, as the light leans toward gold, you feel the first hint of weariness settling into your limbs, the honest kind, woven from work that mattered. Even the quiet air inside the cabin carries a different tone now, softer and heavier with the promise of rest. You move toward the hearth and add another log to the fire. Flames rise at once, bright and lively, grateful for the fuel. The warmth spreads through the room, brushing your face with a familiar, almost affectionate heat. You lift the kettle, still warm from earlier, and refill it with fresh water from the bucket. As it begins to heat again, a soft metallic hiss fills the air, a comforting sound that blends easily with the crackling of the fire. On the small table beside the window sits the remainder of the stew, thick from cooling but still fragrant. You stir it, adding a little hot water to loosen it, then set it near the fire to warm. The scent rises herbs, beans, the earthy echo of potatoes. It fills the cabin with a feeling of safety, of nourishment earned after a day of steady effort. Outside, the sky shifts from pale blue to pale gold, to something deeper rose, amber, then a dusky violet. Snow reflects each shade like a giant canvas. Shadows stretch long across the clearing, each one crisp and sharply outlined. The bare branches of the trees catch the last light and glow faintly, like they're wearing thin threads of silver. You take a seat near the window and lift the cloth covering. The world is still, utterly calm, as if the storm last night had never happened at all. But the snowbanks, the broken branches, and the uneven drifts tell the truth. Nature doesn't erase its stories, it rewrites them. From beyond the edge of the woods, you catch a faint movement, a single bird hopping on the branch of a fir tree shaking loose a few flakes of snow. Bold little thing, to be out this early after a storm. Its chirp is tentative at first, then more confident. The first true sound of evening. Settlers believed storms had moods, and that animals knew when the mood had shifted for good. Tonight, the land gives off the hum of calm, stability, renewal. You lower the cloth and return to the hearth. The stew is ready. The kettle hums. The fire glows as if it too is settling down for the evening. You ladle a portion of the stew into your wooden bowl and take a seat at the table. The warmth of the bowl spreads through your palms, thawing the last traces of cold from your day. You take your first slow bite, simple food, but rich with the kind of flavor that only emerges after long simmering and longer storms. As you eat, you think about the tasks waiting tomorrow. Cutting, more firewood, clearing the path to the creek, rechecking the roof, repairing the rope on the chicken pen, setting new traps. It's a long list, but tomorrow is tomorrow, Tonight belongs to quiet. When you finish your meal, you clean the bowl with a little hot water from the kettle, scrubbing it gently before drying it with the soft cloth hanging by the hearth. Small tasks, slow tasks, tasks that feel grounding. You walk to the window one more time. The sky has deepened into indigo, sprinkled with the faintest beginnings of stars. A thin crescent moon rises just above the treetops, delicate and pale, like a whisper of light. Snow glows faintly in its reflection, turning the clearing into a silver field. You listen carefully to the night. No wind, no distant snapping branches. Just silence, tender, newly born, still stretching from the storm's retreat. Settlers cherished these evenings after storms. They wrote about them, with surprising poetry moments, when the world, exhausted from its own wildness, finally gave you space to breathe again. You pull the quilt from the bed and wrap it loosely around your shoulders. Its weight is soft, grounding. You sit on the edge of the bed, watching the fire burn lower, logs collapsing into glowing beds of ember. The lantern flickers softly overhead, its flame no longer straining against drafts. A faint crackle comes from the hearth, followed by the gentle sigh of hot air rising. You inhale deeply. The warmth settles into your chest like a quiet reassurance. The cabin feels fuller tonight, not crowded, but lived in. Every patch, every log, every repair you made today has shaped it into what it now is. A home that endures the storm, then welcomes you back into its steady embrace. The fire dims further. The kettle grows quiet. Outside, the last traces of daylight fade completely. You feel the kind of tired that comes only after meeting nature on its own terms and returning whole. The evening after the storm is soft, untouched by fear or urgency. A small reward for endurance, a gentle promise of tomorrow, a peaceful sigh breathed across the world. The night settles deep around the cabin, wrapping the world in a dark, quiet calm that feels almost impossible compared to the chaos of the storm before. You sit for a long while by the fire, wrapped in your quilt, listening to the soft murmurs of burning wood. Each crackle feels like punctuation at the end of a long chapter. Each ember a small glowing reminder that survival isn't loud or heroic. It's steady, patient, often unseen. You rise slowly, stretching your arms overhead, feeling the warmth of the cabin cling to your skin. The fire has burned down to a low, comfortable glow, and the lantern casts a soft golden pool of light across the floor. Outside the window, moonlight spills over the snow like crushed silver. The storm has left the world looking clean, new, and startlingly bright in the quiet darkness. You walk to the window and lift the cloth one more time. The clearing outside is serene. No wind, no falling snow, no shifting branches, just crystalline stillness. Even the trees seem relieved, their heavy limbs glittering like they've been draped in frost-laced velvet. In the distance, you see a rabbit dart across the open path, its tracks forming tiny indentations that disappear each time the moonlight shifts. A frontier truth drifts into your mind, one you've heard neighbors say in moments like this. The morning after a storm is the world remembering itself. Tonight, it feels true. The land isn't just resting, it's recovering, dreaming itself back into motion. You return to the hearth and gently stir the embers. They glow bright red, warm enough to hold the night. You add a small log, not for heat, but for company, and watch the flame catch slowly, stretching in tiny tendrils before settling into a steady flicker. You sit on the edge of the bed, letting your fingers rest against the worn wood of the frame. You feel the soft give of the straw mattress beneath you, the gentle creak of the logs adjusting to the evening's temperature, the slow rhythm of your own breath unwinding. The storm is over. The night is calm. And for the first time in what feels like days, your body begins to release the tension it's been holding since the first gust of wind slammed into your cabin. You take a deep breath, then another. Warm air fills your lungs, slow and even. There will be challenges in the days ahead, some small, some heavy. The snow will harden, the chores will grow, the land will shift again as winter continues its endless conversation with the frontier. But tonight, none of that matters, because tonight, the world is quiet, and you are safe. You tuck the quilt more closely around your shoulders, stretch your legs under its warmth, and sit with the cabin in shared silence. The storm has tested you, pushed you, pressed against every wall of your small wooden world. But your shelter held. Your fire endured. Your hands did what they needed to. One last ember pops in the hearth, sending up a tiny spray of sparks before settling back into its glow. You smile softly, a small sound for the end of a long story. Now comes rest. Real rest. The kind you can feel all the way into your bones. You blow out the lantern, darkness gathers gently around you, and you settle back, letting the night cradle you in its slow, steady rhythm. The fire glows low, just a soft wash of orange light breathing across the cabin walls. Shadows stretch gently across the floorboards, long and unhurried, like they too have finally decided there's no reason to rush anymore. You let out a long breath, quiet, warm, drifting into the still air of the room. Outside, the moon hangs above the tree line in a thin, pale curve, its light softening the edges of the world. The snow reflects it back in wide, shimmering patches, turning the clearing into a silver sea that rises and falls with gentle slopes. Not a sound stirs, not a branch shifts. The world has curled into its own quiet exhale. You lie back on the bed, feeling the gentle give of the straw beneath you, the weight of the quilt settling comfortably across your body. Each breath you take grows slower, deeper, warmer, the kind of breath that tells your muscles they can finally let go, tells your mind it no longer needs to scan the walls for cracks or listen for the storm's distant roar. In this peaceful, cocooned silence, the cabin becomes something more than shelter. It becomes a companion, a steady presence, shaped by your hands and strengthened by the storm you face together. The logs rest, the roof relaxes, the air settles. Your eyes grow heavy, and the soft glow of the last embers fades to a gentle pulse of red. The snow outside blurs into a quiet haze. The world narrows to warmth, softness, breath, and as the frontier night deepens, the storm long gone, and the silence tender around you, you ease, deeper into rest, slowly, gently, and let sleep carry you into its wide, quiet dawn.